Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order at 7:06 p.m. on Monday the 6th. Just to clarify our process for this evening, we have on the docket our finance meeting first, which should not take very long. It's a number of several action items, and then we're going to move into the working board meeting. So we'll transfer over to Paul and Suni to chair that meeting. So I know many of you are here for the working board meeting, so I just wanted to make it clear that we are going to be taking a few action items on the finance side first. So with that, first I'd like to move that the Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the September 25th, 2017, we need to.
Chow.
Here.
Here. Cohen.
Here. Thanks, sorry about that. In terms of our first action item meeting being the minutes, the Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the September 25th, 2017 Board Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented. Do I have a second?
Second. Chow.
Yes.
Tanya Bodie. Yes. Cohen. Yes.
So moved. Our second action item is related to the fiscal year 17 audit. The audit is in our packets, and I think I'll turn it over
So
Kathy?
our financial audit has been completed, and we have Ms. Iman Diab from our accounting firm, RSM, and she's here to present our audit.
Thank you.
And there is a copy of the brief PowerPoint
In our packets.
in your packet.
Thank you, Kathy. My name is Iman Diab, and I'm the manager on the engagement. And if you guys all have the PowerPoint presentation in front of you, I'm just going to kind of walk through that and kind of a high level of the financial report and the results on that end. So we'll kind of start off talking about the engagement team and then the audit process, and then just again high level financial report highlights, and then kind of finishing off with the single audit report. So we did have a little bit of transition as far as the engagement team goes. John George is the partner consistent with the FY16 audit. Again, I'm the manager on the engagement, and Chelsea Willenborg was the senior associate on the engagement, and she was kind of involved more so in the day-to-day operations, so she was out in the field pretty consistently for the 2 to 3 weeks we were in the field. And Chelsea was the associate, the staff on the engagement last year, so kind of a good transition as far as the audit for this year. And then moving on, just to kind of high level touch base a little bit on the audit process, we had planning for the engagement in June and July, and this kind of involves just kind of firm internal meetings and then your meetings with management if there's anything that comes out of there as far as strategizing about risk. We'd modify the audit program as far as final field work goes, but again, no issues came up on that end. And then we had preliminary field work the week of July 10th, and this would be where we're focusing on internal control understanding updates, so we kind of focus on capital assets, the budgeting process, cash, payroll, things like that. But as far as our test of controls, we focus on payroll and disbursements, and again, no issues there. And we also focus on analytical procedures, board minutes, and then sending out our confirmations in that process. And then final field work, we had August 21st, 28th, and then September 4th. And then that would be where we're kind of focusing on our substantive testing of material account balances, transaction testing. So when we're looking at revenues and expenses, we're more so focused on transactions throughout the year, whereas when you're looking at the balance sheet items, you're more focusing on the year-end balance. And we had our reports drafted to management on the 24th, and then our anticipated final issuance, we're hoping for this week. And then moving on, kind of getting into the financial report highlights, we kind of stress that in the entire report, the only piece that's ours is the independent auditor's report, and again, an unmodified opinion, so this is your cleanest, highest, best opinion that you can get on the statements. And then Management's discussion and analysis, you'll see is on page pages 3 through 12, and I think that'll be like kind of a good summary of your government-wide financial statements and your fund financial statements. And there is where you'll kind of see the comparative information and management's kind of explanations of variance FY16 and FY17. And then your government-wide financials are going to be on pages 13 to 14, and then your fund financials will be on pages 15 through 18. And then moving on to, so now we're going to just kind of high-level touch base on the numbers. When you're looking at the government-wide financial statements, you have your statement of net position. If you're looking at the net invested in capital assets, 2017 was $17.8 million, down from last year from $19.5 million. Then your net invested in capital will be your total capital assets plus your outstanding capital asset related debt. And then restricted, fairly consistent with last year, down by about $300,000 to $6 million. And then your unrestricted is again fairly consistent with last year, $17.4 million, just down by about $100,000. And then you have your total liabilities, your current at $2.8 million, and this will be your current portion of your long-term debt and your compensated absences, so it'll be the piece that's due within 1 year. And your long-term will be the piece that's 1 year, due within 1 year or more. And then as far as your statement of activities, change in net position is 1.3 million, and last year was about negative 200,000, and that's primarily due to the spending down of the capital projects fund. And then moving on to your fund financial statements, just kind of a high-level overview. Your fund financials don't include your capital assets or debt, and then this also includes a reconciliation to your government-wide financial statements. And then if you're looking at your governmental fund balance, this year was $28.1 million, and then it's down from $30.5 million from 2016. Again, that's your spending down of your capital projects fund. And then when you're looking at your change in fund balance, this year was a $2.3 million decrease, and last year was about $850,000 decrease. And the biggest difference between your change in fund balance and the fund financials, and then your change in the net position of the decrease of $1.3 million from the last slide, it'll be the fact that debt service of $2.6 million is on the government-wide financial statements is not an expense, and then on the government-wide financial statements you'll see an additional expense of $1.4 million, which will be the net of your capital assets less your accumulated depreciation. And then moving on just to your operating results. So these are just your major funds again. General fund is pretty consistent with last year. You'll see a net increase in fund balance of about $340,000. Debt service had a net decrease of about $283,000, and your capital projects fund had a decrease of about $2.9 million. And again, that's to your spending down of your capital projects fund. And then the next slide just kind of compares your budget to actual. The district budgeted for revenues and expenditures to be pretty flat this year, and then if you look at actual, revenues came in a little less, but then when you look at expenditures are also down for a surplus of about $780,000 this year. And then moving on to the single audit. So this year we tested 2 major programs. We did the special education cluster, which is your IDEA, so your IDEA flow through, IDEA preschool, and then also Head Start. And last year we tested the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program and Head Start. We had no material weaknesses in internal control over financial reporting. We did have one significant deficiency similar to last year. The district had an unreconciled amount of about $35,000, so it is down significantly from last year. We had no control deficiencies related to internal control on the federal programs, and we had one compliance finding related to the late data collection form filing.
And the one unreconciled number we were able to reconcile.
That one was, I'll let Kathy comment on.
Yes, so so what happened was the amount of cash at the bank was higher than what we had in the books, and the reason why we couldn't pinpoint the difference was a problem with the system. Our outstanding checklist was not complete, and we knew that the difference was there because in the following month, in July, it cleared our bank, and the books match the bank, but during that month, we were having problems with our software. So that particular list was missing a few checks, and one we were able to find through going manually through every single check, but the other one we couldn't.
And again, it's not a significant dollar amount.
Yeah, and no cash was missing, because what we were missing, it was just the amount on the reconciling piece in our books. But yeah, that it cleared, and as of July, we had no variance.
And just in the language of auditors, it was a deficiency, but not a significant or material weakness.
That one was not a material weakness, but we did consider a significant deficiency just because we had a similar finding last year. But again, not as big of a dollar amount. Yeah.
Can I ask what the compliance-related finding was relative to data collection?
Yes, so that one, the requirement there is, the federal reporting package is due to, so it's online, they submit it to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, and it's due within, and this was for the 2016 audit, and it's due within the earlier of 30 days of the auditor's report date, or 9 months after year end. And this one, so we assist the district in kind of setting it up and like getting that whole process and ball rolling. And we had turnover on our end at the engagement team last year, and that one did get overlooked. But unfortunately, it's one of those that we do have to report, but we do just recommend that the district kind of track that due date internally. Maybe like getting just a compliance calendar or something like that just to track the due date. But it's not a significant issue. Doesn't affect anything operationally.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is there a reason why you would test the Head Start program 2 years in a row and not have a different program as a part of that?
So that one was largely focused on the amount that was being dispersed from that one, so it was fairly large this year. Yep. Any other questions on the single audit?
And I just want to add that we are working with our software company to make sure that these problems do not appear in the future.
Okay, thanks, Kathy.
And then the final slide is just on the Park School. So we do the audit of the joint agreement for the Park School. And again, this is the exact same team as the audit for the District 65, same timeline. And then as far as the independent auditor's report, so again, same as District 65, an unmodified opinion. Again, your cleanest opinion. No findings or internal controls related to that. And then the plan would be to issue the Park School reports the same time as District 65.
Great.
Are there any questions or?
Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure working with RSM again this year.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure working with you.
Thanks. So if there are not any other questions, I can go ahead and make the motion. The Finance Committee recommends that the fiscal year 17 audit be presented to the full board for approval. A second?
Second.
Cho,
Yes.
Tanya Bodie,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
So moved. So we will, I assume, take this action as a full board at the next board meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we can get that on, it would be helpful, I think, for the other presentations. Thanks, Raphael. Our next action item is the truth in taxation resolution, which we do every year, issuance of our tax levy. So I think Raphael, are you going to lead us in this presentation? Okay.
I'm waiting for the screen to come
Sure.
up.
We're waiting for the screen to come up. I always found truth in taxation to be a wonderful term, as opposed to whatever else you could do. Just some levity for the time and space we have. You know, while you're getting that on,
Oh, sorry.
there's another remote. Okay.
Yeah,
Did you get it?
yes.
Okay. So that one's working?
So the most important,
No, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to do more filler if it was necessary.
it just disappeared again.
Oh, you disappeared up top.
Can we only do one at a time?
So the most important thing we do as a district is educate our children. And in order for us to do that, we need money. And the majority of the money that we get to educate our children comes from property taxes. And the process of getting that property tax is called the levy. So the money that we're going to get for next year, we have to do the levy process right now. And I'm going to kind of walk through the process of doing that. So this is the timeline that we have to follow by law in order for us to be able to send the tax bills out to taxpayers in the community. So today is the first day of the process, and then the board is going to approve a resolution in November 28th, and on the 23rd, we have to publish a notice in the newspaper indicating that we are following the process and how much we want to levy. And by December 4th, the board has to approve the recommended levy, and that has to be filed with the county clerk no later than the last Tuesday in December, which happens to be the day after Christmas this year. Just to give you an idea, I just said the largest source of funding that we have to run the school district is from property tax. So if you look at the pie that I put up there, close to 80% of the revenue that we get, the money that we get to run the district, comes from property tax. That's how important the process is to our financial solvency. Now, in order to make sure that we speak in the same language, what I'm just going to do is very quickly take you through the terminologies that is used when we talk about a tax levy. The levy is really a request of how much we need based on the budget that we developed. And after that, an extension is actually the bill that you get in the mail, the taxpayers get. That is determined by the county clerk's office based on a number of things. And one of those variables is actually the CPI. And what the CPI does is it's an aggregate value of things that make prices rise, that determines the price of things in the economy. They include things like housing, electricity, gasoline, and those kinds of things. And the EAV, Equalized Assessment Value, which you're going to hear me talk about frequently in this presentation, is really the average value of properties that are taxable in the community. That is very important in helping us determine how much we're going to get. And the final levy is actually going to be determined by the county clerk based on a number of variables. And one important factor of that is PTEL, which is the property tax limitation law. What that law does is sets how much money we can raise, how high we can increase the taxes. And one of those big factors is actually CPI, which I mentioned earlier before. The law states that we can't levy more than 5% or the actual value of CPI. The lowest one is what we take, which in the year 2017, what we'll do is we'll use last December's CPI, which is 2.1, is what we're going to use to set the levy for 2017. So that's by far the most we can hope to get, 2.1%. And once we've done that, then we file the levy with the county clerk, who then sends out the bills that we all get twice a year. Now, the question comes up a lot of time, how is the levy related to the budget? And it is related to it because the biggest component of the revenue in the budget, and we get that twice a year. The first installment we get in the spring, and the second installment we get in the fall. And the one that we get in the spring is actually the larger amount, 55% of the levy. And the balance of that we get in the fall. And these are the major funds that we have in the district that we use to fund what we do in the district. The largest component of that is the education fund. And that really pays for the salary and a lot of the instructional expenses that we come across in the district. And as you see there, for 2017 levy, we are levying 21 million and some more money. I wanted to point out we actually will not get that amount. What we just do is we levy that much because there are a lot of things that we don't know. For example, we don't know the value of the homes. Even though folks get a tax bill early in the year, people can appeal those taxes. That's one variable. Another variable is new construction. We don't know what the new construction is for the upcoming year. That will not be determined till later in the spring. But we have to levy now. So we are kind of doing some things based on stuff we know and some things we don't know. But the tricky part about the whole levy process is if we don't try to project how much new properties are and we don't levy those new properties, we will never be able to collect the taxes on those properties ever again. And what it then means is that folks who are actually being taxed right now, they have to bear the burden going forward into years into the future. So the O&M, as you see there, that's the money that we use to upkeep our building. And the transportation fund, of course, pays for bus transportation for our kids back and forth. Special education is used to educate our children who need special services. Tort fund is what we use to buy commercial liability insurance and also to protect the district as far as risk management and legal services as they become necessary in the district. IMRF is the pension fund payment for employees who are not licensed. So anyone who's not a licensed teacher or an administrator, their pension contribution from the district is paid for out of that IMRF. And Social Security is what everybody pays in the private sector as well as in the public sector. That's the FICA that we see in everyone's paycheck every pay period. And the portion that the employer pays, that's the Social Security part. And life safety has some projects that we do in our building that are necessary by code. That's what that is. So the total aggregate levy for all these funds comes out that we're levying $108 million. As you will notice in the next slide, that doesn't include the debt service. The debt service are brought on by bonds that we've sold in the past, and those are now subject to the cap. So whatever it is that we owe, those bills are actually sent out, and those are included in our levy. And for 2017, we're requesting $6.2 million for the debt service levy. Now, this is the history of the tax extension. What I want to point your focus to is the last year, which is the 2017. What I mentioned earlier, the CPI that we used was actually December 2016 CPI, and that amount is 2.1%, and that's the absolute maximum we can increase the taxes by in 2017. But you could look at that and say, why are we showing an aggregate levy of 2.96? I mentioned that earlier. That is because we don't know for certain how many new constructions are there. And also, we don't know the value of other properties that are currently not in the tax roll, that may come on the tax roll later on in the spring when the bills are sent out. And we want to be able to capture that. But I want you to know the absolute maximum that we can expect to get is to 2.1, not the 4.96. And so I'm trying to show the difference between levy and extension. So the way to look at that, levy is a request, and an extension is the actual amount that we get, that the county actually sends out. So levy is a demand, extension is actually the real money. So if you look at it, you will see that there are some variances. What I've done in that slide, I've compared what we extended last year to what we extended last year is the amount that we really got last year to what we are levying this year. And if you notice, there were some ups and downs there. And the reasons is driven by the budget. So there are years where we need certain amount of money in certain funds, and in subsequent years, we may need lower amount in certain funds. And that's what accounts for those variances. And another thing I want to point out is, by law, we can't have too much money in certain funds. We're only required to levy as much. So if we look at our fund balance at the end of the year, and we have a higher than necessary fund balance, then what we have to do, we have to levy a lower amount in subsequent years, which accounts for the variance that you see, some of the reds that are showing up in the extension slide. So I mentioned this before, and I want to go over it again because it gets confusing to folks. They will say, why are you telling me you can only get 2.1% in levy, but you're showing a 4.96%? And the difference is there's so many unknowns right now. We're just trying to be prudent in making sure that whatever we're entitled to collect to be able to fund the operation of the district, we do that. Because if we don't, we lose it forever. And the EAV is essentially what I mentioned, the value of all taxable property in the district. In 2015, before the triennial reassessment, that was $2.4 billion. After the triennial reassessment, that EAV is now $2.9 billion. It's a difference of 10.48%. So now, this is another point that comes up a lot of time. People ask questions about what are TIFs and how do TIFs impact taxes, property taxes. What TIFs are essentially is the city designates certain areas in an attempt to develop those areas as tax incremental financing district. During those periods, the taxes on those areas are they're frozen. And any of the taxing bodies, such as we are as a school district, we don't get any of that money. For the next 23 years, when those districts are designated, we do not collect any money from those areas. We can only collect money after the 23 years is done, and then those properties rolls back to our tax roll. But during the time that TIF is in session, we lose the ability to be able to tax those properties. That's how TIF impacts the amount of money that we collect in property tax. Any questions?
Thank you, Raphael. Before we ask other questions, I just want to say, I don't know, this is probably my fifth one of these. That was the most succinct and understandable explanation of the levy I have heard since 2013. So thank you very much for helping us digest that, and also the community, because it seems so obtuse and complicated at first glance. So thank you for your presentation. So with that, anyone have questions about the levy, the proposed levy, or either the packet or the presentation?
I had one quick question first.
Yes.
For understanding purposes of what happened historically, in 2015, it looked like there was a pretty significant difference between what was levied and what the extension was for the education fund. It looks like it was $4 million difference, $3.5 million difference.
2015?
Yes. What was the reason for the extension being so much less than what was requested in the levy?
What it is, what you would normally find is that there are variables that we don't know. For example, you make a best estimate calculation of what new properties will be for the year. And you do what is called balloon levy, because you want to capture as much of the funds that you need. But sometimes you guess right, sometimes you guess wrong. And it's an estimate.
Got it.
And in that case, what I hazard to guess is that we were over-optimistic about the amount of money we could levy, which is why we will balloon higher than what the actual extension will be.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks.
And I just want to add that we add this unknown, this amount, usually in the education fund. Yeah. So that's why this particular fund, the variance shows up in the education fund, not other funds.
Right. And to Kathy's point is, a lot of the other funds, there's statutory limit as to what you can do with those funds. But the education funds give you more flexibility. So when you look into balloon, you always kind of ballooning those education funds because you can do more with it than the other ones.
And the balloon levy will be adjusted once all the variables come in. The assessor will assess and then adjust appropriately.
Understood.
Other questions? I have a couple. Does anyone else have other questions before I do? Okay. I just have 3 quick questions. One is related to how the referendum funds are distributed across the levy. So where would we see the impact of the increase from our successful operating referendum in the levy funds? Is that just an education fund, or is that across the board?
Most directly will be in the education fund, but we also will see some impact in O&M as well as the special education funds too.
Okay.
Because the other funds and transportation fund, we do see some of that increase in there too. Those are the ones where you see most of it: education fund, O&M, transportation fund, and special education fund.
Okay. So that would also be a reason for some of the increases in your slide 10, why there would be such a significant difference in some of those funds between the 2016 extension and then the estimated 2017 levy, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Then secondly, I just wanted to reiterate the increase in the EAV of 10.5% is based on the triennial reassessment, but is that a one-year increase? That's actually, the 10.5% is increase from last year, correct? Even though it's based on a 3-year reassessment.
From 2015 to 2016.
2015 to
So,
2016.
right. So honestly, if we really want to be honest about it, it was from 2013 to 2015 because it's done every 3 years. So
Right.
It's not every year.
So we wouldn't have seen increases in the EAV in 2014, 2015, right? Okay.
Because this year, I'm only projecting that we'll see 6 basis point in increase. So there's not much of an increase from last year to this year.
Right. Right.
Because there is no reassessment.
So that 10% effectively is the increase in property values over a 3-year period
That's correct.
estimated for Evanston and or for our area. Okay. And then the last question, was there a last question?
Which we have no control over. That's an assessor's assessment.
Correct, yes, and we don't have control over it, although we are still capped at the amount that we can levy. So an increased EAV effectively can increase at 10%, but that doesn't mean that we can levy 10% more, just so folks understand that. And we went into that in a significant detail last year during the referendum, but I just wanted to bring it back. I think those were, actually, I thought I had 3, but I only had 2. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, this is something we have to do annually. It's obviously critical for us so that we can go funding. And the actual extension, remind us of the dates again so we're doing the levy and the extension would be, when would we get the information for the extension? Is that in February?
Normally in the spring.
In the
It'll be
spring.
March.
Okay.
March, April, we will get a preliminary extension confirmation from the county clerk, and we'll have to sign off on it. So we'll be much lower than what we are levying now.
And then primarily that affects the 2018-19 school year for the second assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
First installment will be in the fall, and the next one will be in the spring.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you. So with that, I think if we have no other questions, we'll vote. Is that mine? The Finance Committee recommends that the tax levy resolution be presented to the full board for approval.
Second. Chow?
Yes?
Tanya Booty?
Yes.
Cohen? Yes.
Great. So moved. I have one thing I wanted to add to that before we move forward, and that is just to make folks mindful. You know, there's current action at the state level. SB 851 which is Senate Bill 851, that's potentially going to the House floor next week, which is, again, brought up again a potential property tax freeze. This SB 851 has been amended. It would be a property tax freeze for 2 years to affect a smaller number of counties versus the whole state, but it would affect Cook County. And that would mean effectively there would be no tax increase. So, and in terms of when it's supposed to be implemented, basically it would be implemented in 2017-18. So would affect our next budget year. It would affect this levy. Yeah.
And the one next year.
So it's really important for folks who are out there and care about public education that you contact your legislators and say they should vote no to SB 851. For our area, our county, Cook County, and our districts in our county, we already have a tax cap, which is what we talked about before. If we are to have a tax freeze for 2 years, that effectively means that we would be able to not increase taxes at all, not respond to the additional needs of our students at all. It would not affect referendum dollars coming in, but it would affect any increase on the substantive part of our budget. So it is very important to us as a school district and to our kids. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there so folks know and can communicate with their legislators.
And since the lion's share of our budget is on the education fund, it will have an impact on programs and programming in our education offerings.
And we are, 80% property tax driven across the state. It's more of a 70-30 split. So we're even more affected because of this than some other districts. Okay, so the last action item is the elevator maintenance contract. And are there any questions about the information on the elevator maintenance contract? Okay, good. Then I'm going to say the Finance Committee recommends that the elevator maintenance contract be presented to the full board for approval.
Second.
Sorry?
Sorry.
Did you
We
want
just
to?
want to make sure that you voted on the levy, which you did.
Yes, we did.
Just double checking.
Thanks.
It's important.
Yes, no, that's very important. So I'll repeat the motion. The Finance Committee recommends that the elevator maintenance contract be presented to the full board for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Chow.
Yes.
Tanya Rudy. Yes. Cohen. Yes.
Motion carries 3-0. And this then I will now adjourn the Finance Committee meeting at 7:44 p.m. and we can transfer over to the working board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. As we do a roll call for
Cohen.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Chow.
Here.
Mendoza.
Here.
Tanya Rudy.
here.
Philhorn.
Here.
Bertha.
Here. Lindsay, can you do the motion for?
I move that the Board of Education approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Cohen.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Chow.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Tanya Rudy.
Yes.
Philhorn.
Yes.
Bertha.
Yes. We're just going to get the clipboard that has the sign-up sheet for public comment. I will remind people that public comment is limited to 3 minutes. You will hear a timer at the end of 3 minutes, at which point we will ask that you wrap up your comments. And please refrain from any personal attacks on district employees or board members. Anything else?
Anybody else? No.
Or anybody else.
Or each other.
Or each other, exactly. Okay, our first speaker will be Kamika Okachukwa. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
So I just state my name and my address, is that?
Yes, please.
Kamika Okechukwu at 250 Ridge Avenue in Evanston. First, I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you for the opportunity to express my concerns. Tonight, I have 2 children at Dr. Bessie Rhodes Global School, and I appreciate the TWE model, so I just would like to share that. I appreciate the TWE model as well as the need to expand this popular program. And I've been excited to see that the district is moving in this direction as I've seen the many emails come out. I truly do feel that the community is both unique and fortunate to offer this program. I also feel that our community is equally unique and fortunate to offer another culture-based magnet program, excuse my voice, ACC. So tonight what I'd like to just talk about is equity in the two programs. I am curious about the equity among the two magnet programs, TWE and ACC, because it has appeared to many families that over time, TWE has continually been offered the successful support tools and resources needed for successful implementation of the program. While I know a lot of parents have expressed concerns about the support for ACC at numerous board meetings, etc. I know in 2014, Dr. B. Coates conducted an assessment for the district of ACC, TWE, and Gen Ed, and concluded that the district has not consistently conducted a comprehensive assessment based on the goals of ACC, nor was it evident that the ACC program was being implemented as originally planned. Additional work and attention should be provided to the ACC to ensure successful implementation, per the Dr. B. Coates report, as well as specifically related to student achievement, curriculum content, instruction assessment, professional development, effective management practices, as well as positive school climate and relationships. At board meetings, I think I recall both current and former board members have conceded that the ACC program and its constituents have not received the support needed to produce the effective outcomes and the results sought to address, that the program sought to address for over a decade. To date, it has still not received the financial support, staff support, or curriculum and resource support necessary for it to thrive and perform at the levels it was intended to when initially developed. So that was the reason why my family transitioned out of the ACC program this year and transitioned to Bessie Rhodes. It seems to me that it's a little unfortunate that the dialogue continues to be about why the TWE program should be expanded. Now, that's not the unfortunate part, but why the ACC program should be dissolved. Some might argue that the interest is not there for the ACC program, but I believe that the interest might be different if the same amount of tools, resources, and supports were in place to properly implement such a program. So again, I would just like to stress today, ACC, I support, TWE, I support it. I support the expansion. I think the district is moving in a great direction, but my concerns are stemmed for the location, as well as the timing when ACC still needs so much support and resources behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my apologies. We do have our district translator here to provide translation services. Manuel, do you want to come in? I apologize for not mentioning that earlier.
Good evening, everybody. Buenas tardes, buenas noches. Si alguno de ustedes necesita traducción al español, si me puede indicar, tenemos el equipo, audífonos. Si levantan la mano, paso con ustedes y les doy el equipo. Anybody need a translation? No? It's free.
Thank you.
My apologies. Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker, Katya Block.
Hi, I just state my name and.
Yeah, please state your name, and if you could please make sure you're speaking into the microphone. Thank you.
Better? Better. Okay, well, my name is Katya Block. I live at 719 Custer Avenue in Evanston. I am here to talk about the TWE expansion, or the proposal for expansion of TWE at Bessie Rhodes. Now, this has been a very fast and short process in making public this proposal before bringing it to the board. We Bessie Rhodes parents just found out about it this past Wednesday night, so it's been a short amount of time to really process all of this information. Now, based on what we've read so far, if this proposal is passed, then beginning next fall, both the current kindergarten classes at Bessie Rhodes will be eliminated and replaced with the TWE classes, and also 2 new TWE teachers, and every year going forward, it will be done until all the grades through 8, since it's K-8 school. Now, we know, at least my husband and I have decided that should this proposal pass, we also have, apart from our daughter who's in 2nd grade, we have a 3-year-old who will be entering kindergarten in the 2019-2020 school year, and we know we will not be enrolling him in Bessie Rhodes. And in not enrolling him in Bessie Rhodes, we will be pulling our daughter out of Bessie Rhodes, since we would like both of our children to be in the same school. Now, the reason we will make this choice is because I have nothing against TWE. I think it's a great program, especially that I'm Latina and my native language is Spanish. So I appreciate that the district does offer this kind of program to Spanish-speaking families who want it. But TWE families may not be the best choices for certain families. Now, for us, we actually we're eligible for TWE, being that I'm a native speaker and at home we speak Spanish, so my daughter was eligible without having to go through the whole lottery process for getting into TWE. But my husband and I made the choice that TWE program was not right for us, and we decided to put our daughter in Bessie Rhodes. Now, if this program is implemented, we know we won't be staying at Bessie Rhodes, and we love the school. My daughter loves her school, and she will have a hard time understanding why we're pulling her out of such a great school and choosing to place her someplace else. We have given so short amount of time to process this, and this proposal now being submitted and a response has to be given, December 4th, I think, is when the decision has to be made. A very short amount of time for families to process this information, to, read and review, investigate. It's not enough time, and I wish we had more time. Is that it?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Tad Block.
Good evening. Do you need the address again?
Please, just state your name and then go ahead.
My name is Tad Block. My wife over there. Our address is 719 Custer in Evanston. As she mentioned, we have a 7-year-old at Bessie Rhodes. I said 7. And just to kind of piggyback on what my wife said, we were eligible for TWE. My daughter was tested, and we were encouraged to submit for TWE. Excuse me, but we chose not to do TWE because we didn't feel that was the best for both of our children. As my wife mentioned, we have a son who will be eventually going into kindergarten. We actually like the global aspect, the global studies aspect of Bessie Rhodes, which was the main reason we chose Bessie Rhodes as a school we wanted our children to attend. And we specifically like the Chinese aspect of it, because at Bessie Rhodes, the children can start Chinese at an early age. So my daughter takes Chinese now in school and the enrichment after school. She really loves it, and and we know that once she gets to high school, that is also an option. So if she, she can continue that in the high school and in the college and, wherever life takes her. And, we've, as talking with other parents, that Chinese was, a major focus on, why they like Bessie Rhodes and the global focus of the school. As my wife said, Spanish is spoken at home, so she gets that at home, but now she's also getting a third language and, exposing, the focuses on other cultures, and she gets that more so at Bessie Rhodes versus, one of the other schools. And, being at its magnet school, she gets it K through 8 all the way through, not just for half of her, not just in elementary school. Again, as my wife said, we're not against TWE. We think it's a wonderful program, and we look forward to hopefully working with you guys and working with the community to preserve the culture that has finally taken place at Bessie Rhodes. As you guys know, there have been a lot of ups and downs and change in administration at that school, and it feels like they finally turned the corner and have, best as I can tell, a stable administration in place, stable teachers, as best as you can, are in place there, and we feel confident with those teachers there. Bessie Rhodes will continue to be a top performing school, and if you change that dynamic, yes, you're not changing it for the students that are already there, but you're changing it for the students that will be coming in, and of course the teachers that are there now, knowing the changes that would be happening, will probably make a mass exodus out of the school, which would impact the students if they stayed. Now, I don't speak for all the parents, I'm sure, but I know a majority of the parents would look forward to possibly working with the board to come up with another site or any other solutions. But we just feel that Bessie Rhodes, that's not the best fit for Bessie Rhodes. Turning the TWE program, turning the school into a complete TWE school is not the best fit for Bessie Rhodes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Donna Sue.
Good evening. My name is Donna Wang Su, and I live at 9414 Harding Avenue in Evanston. I do want to start off that I think Evanston is the best place to live and grow up. I was born in Evanston myself. I have nothing against TWE. In fact, my best friend did her thesis, PhD dissertation on it. I understood and supported it, and now seeing it real life, it's different. For me, I grew up, my parents were immigrants from Taiwan. I actually grew up in a trilingual household. I spoke English at school, but then Taiwanese and Mandarin Chinese at home. And then in school, I chose to learn Latin and French and Spanish for 6 years. So actually my written and reading of Spanish is even better than my Chinese. I think my son asked me how to write his name, and I looked at him and said, I don't know, go ask Grandpa. But the one thing that I have noticed in Evanston is the consistency of quality. I'm always impressed with the quality of people that we have that represent us, whether it's on the board, in the schools, the administration, the faculty. When we decided that we wanted to stay here, and I really fought hard against my in-laws that live in Wilmette. They're like, cross the border. No, not doing it. And I visited every single one of the elementary schools 4 years ago when my son was getting ready for kindergarten. And we sat down and we said, we really want Bessie Rhodes. We wanted Bessie Rhodes because of the Mandarin aspect. And my kids have been learning Spanish since their toddler years at Caravali Montessori. And we tried. We've been applying for 4 years. And this is the first year we are finally at Bessie Rhodes. And my daughter's now in kindergarten. My son's in 3rd grade. And I think the main key factor on why this, I feel, affects me so much is just the consistency and stability. I kept my kids for the longest time together, and now we're at Bessie Rhodes, and we really want to be here all the way up until 8th grade. And hearing about all the turmoil and the change in administration that Bessie Rhodes has faced in the last decade, and then to know that in the next year there's going to be a shift, and there's going to be a lot of changes. And really it comes down to the equity in education. And it made me really think about, you know what, no matter your personal, your social, or ethnic circumstances, you all get, the same chance to reach a basic minimum of skills. So it really made me think, what is the goal of transforming Bessie Rhodes into a TWE program? Is this the right audience? What are we trying to target? And these are all these questions that I still have. And I understand from reading my friend's dissertation that having a TWE school is the best source of success and having 2 classrooms, but also taking note that Bessie Rhodes is kindergarten all the way up to 8th grade, too. And then I couldn't help but think about Dr. Bessie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kwansu?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kwan Su, 9414 Harding. That was my lovely wife there. We've been Evanstonians since '06. We actually settled in Evanston as a sort of negotiation. Close enough to our city friends, just far enough away from my parents in Wilmette. I went to New Trier, so I'm from the area. I know, boo, Wilmette, you know, New Trier, whatever. So anyhow, one of the reasons why we decided to move to Evanston, and the part of Evanston that we did was actually Care Valley Montessori, because my wife actually went there. We really wanted to invest in our community, and when our kids finally got old enough to finally decide to split them into 2 different rooms, we moved to our place in Harding, and we were so excited that we also found out that we got into Bessie Rhodes. As she said before, we've been applying for 4 years, so this was our reach school for our kids, and we were super, super pumped. 2 main reasons: because of the global focus. Not to say that King Arts or King Lab doesn't have that awesome pull as well, because the arts are not appreciated enough, they're not paid enough. But for us, we decided that the global focus is where we wanted our kids to be. And also the elephant in the room is that it also offers Chinese. In case you couldn't tell, I'm Asian American, and then on top of that, I'm Chinese American. I've grown up in my life here in the States with an ethnic name, Quan Ren, so I've had to work very hard to be articulate, to be well-spoken, and unfortunately, in this day and age, even in the eyes of some Americans, I'm not American enough. And to find that the school offers Chinese was a huge thing for my wife and I, that our kids didn't have to go somewhere else. We didn't have to do an outside program to have them learn Chinese, that they can learn Chinese with their peers, that they go to regular week school with, was very, very fun for us, and it was very exciting. And then we just got the news on Wednesday that it might be eliminated, so it's kind of tough because we just got to the party, and it might go. I just heard on the radio this morning that China's looking to be a dominant player in the hybrid car industry. So if we want to maintain this global focus, if we want to give our children an opportunity to be able to communicate in that language, it helps them to be a part of that type of competition on a global scale. Because the first thing that you need to be able to do when you sit at the table of any business table in any industry that you're at is communication. And if you don't have that opportunity, that choice of learning Chinese, you're going to hamstring a lot of our kids that way. And also just a quick retention of our staff is going to be, faculty and staff is going to be very important. Ms. Nichols and Mr. Spaguza have been a wonderful, wonderful presence at the school. Because our kids are transitioning, we were kind of scared about them being able to make new friends and adapt to the new curriculum. And they've been amazing. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Maya Wilkins.
Good evening. My name is Maya Wilkins, and I'm at 8625 Central Park Avenue. So I have a daughter who's in 2nd grade at Bessie Rhodes, and then I also have a 4-year-old son who I'd hope would attend Bessie Rhodes in 2 years as well. And my daughter loves attending Bessie Rhodes. It's a very special community, and it's provided a strong educational experience for her so far. She's had phenomenal teachers, and they've been teachers at Bessie Rhodes, all of them 15 to 30 years. She has a very positive relationship with the other students at the school, and the school has just been a really wonderful educational opportunity for her as well. So I have no doubt that if Bessie Rhodes is converted to TWE, the next 8 years during which the school transitions will be filled with turmoil and inconsistency. Because, let's face it, it's guaranteed that teachers who have a wealth of experience and who really set the tone in the community for the school will begin to leave, many of them before their time is up. And this will directly impact the educational experience of all the Bessie Rhodes students, Even if new teachers are hired quickly, they will not have the experience or the history that the current group of teachers have. And then at the same time, I'm sure many students will leave as well because they don't want to be stuck in the transition. So that just leads to a downward spiral at the school, which won't be a good learning environment for any of the students at the school. And then on top of that, many families like mine will have to decide what to do with their younger children who haven't started yet. So we either have the choice of having them go to a school that doesn't necessarily offer a program that's best for them, or have them go to another school. I've talked to parents who already live in bilingual families, and for them, the TWE program, just because they speak English in another language, just isn't the best fit. Or families whose students have certain learning difficulties, and so the program wouldn't be right for them either. So because of that, you either have children who are growing up in the same household with very different educational experiences, or just two different schools completely. And then the other thing that really saddens me about the change of Bessie Rhodes is that it will take away the focus from being a true global studies program. So my daughter loves the focus and appreciation for other cultures at the school. She tells me hello and asks me what my name is every day in Chinese, and I haven't figured out how to answer her back in Chinese yet, but I'm working on it. And I'm just so glad that she's learning this at a young age. She's had classroom assignments and attended events where she's learned about countries from all over the world. And it's funny, just the other day I heard her talking to one of her friends saying she wanted to visit all 7 continents. And that's at 7 years old, and that's what I don't want to lose that we have at Bessie Rhodes.
Thank you. Henry Wilkins.
Hi, good evening. My name is Henry Wilkins. I live at 8625 Central Park Avenue. Thank you for giving us the time today to speak on the proposal for this TWE program. I have a daughter. I'm the husband of Maya Wilkins, who just spoke. I have a daughter that's in 2nd grade at Betsy Rhodes and a 4-year-old son that we plan to enroll at Betsy Rhodes. I was saddened and I was disappointed and at the same time disgusted to learn about the plan to revamp Betsy Rhodes. We decided to send our daughter to Betsy Rhodes because of the global studies focus and because of the stability of having our children attend the same school from kindergarten through 8th grade. We did not and do not think that TWE is the best choice for our children and family. We wanted our children to attend school together and not to have to switch schools. At this point, if Betsy Rhodes is converted to TWE, it will mean that our daughter will switch schools and she will not have the stability or continuity that is best for her. This is traumatic. This is a big decision that will have a huge negative impact on our family. I feel these changes are being made hastily and also clumsy. Most Betsy Rhodes families didn't find out about this until Wednesday night. I think the Betsy Rhodes community should have been given more notice and should have been involved in discussions in the work to determine a solution much earlier in the process. We are the families who will be impacted. I understand surveys were performed for parents that don't even attend Betsy Rhodes. In closing, I would love to work with your team to come up with a solution that is more viable, a more win-win situation that accomplishes the goals that you have and avoids the trauma this change will cause to our family and the families at Betsy Rhodes. Thank you for listening and consideration of the circumstances involved therein.
Thank you. Lauren Grodnicki.
Hi, my name is Lauren Grodnicki. Am I speaking into the microphone? Can I take this off?
It's actually hooked up. Maybe you can shut it and.
I hope this isn't counting. My name is Lauren Grodnicki. I live at 3636 Enfield Avenue. And thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to voice our concerns about the TWE expansion into Bessie Rhodes. First of all, the proposal that the board gave us only cites Thomas and Collier. The methodology and conclusions of the study have been called into question. Their initial paper was published several years after it was announced, but other authors cited them without having had the opportunity to read their published paper. The graphs that are in this paper were their theories, and they didn't have any evidence to back them up. They just said, oh, here's what we think will happen. Unfortunately, a lot of papers cite Thomas and Collier, so it's difficult to find papers that the public can access that specifically speak to the concern that I have, which is students with learning difficulties. I did find, and I have a reference that I can send to you from the, I think, University of Minnesota, that talks about successful students in immersion programs and unsuccessful students in immersion programs. The unsuccessful student in an immersion program is often a reluctant speaker, imitates with difficulty, doesn't notice errors, often fears making mistakes, poor modeling environment at home and in the community and at school, has a defeatist attitude, often has poor first language skills, mistrusts, is often inattentive and unfocused, is often unwilling, has poor auditory discrimination, has poor memory and poor metacognitive awareness, often has unconvinced parents who are unprepared or unwilling to help. So some of these items are on the parents, and some of these are probably evident before a child enters the program, but not all of them. And when I was reading through this list, I have a son who's in 3rd grade at Bessie Rhodes, and had he been at Bessie Rhodes after the switch, after TWE became implemented in both strands, he would have had a horrible, horrible time there, and his confidence and his ability to be a student would have been shattered. And I'll come back to that. But I would like to tell you a tale of 2 students. And this story takes place after Bessie Rhodes has become 100% TWE. Joe entered Bessie Rhodes in kindergarten. He was a bright student and interested in learning in general. He excels in all of his subjects and doesn't have any trouble with bilingual instruction. His younger brother Mark enters kindergarten. Mark has some learning difficulties. These difficulties were masked by bilingual instruction and were not diagnosed until he was in 2nd or 3rd grade. At that point, it's determined that TWE is not a good fit for Mark and he has to leave the program. But in this situation, he has to leave the whole school. He has to leave behind his friends and go into a new environment where he doesn't know anybody. And he's already behind because it's been shown that TWE students are behind for the first 3 years and then they kind of catch up to their non-TWE peers. So here's a student who's already struggling with learning, and on top of that, he has to go make all new friends and go to a school where he doesn't get to see his brother every day. This is actually a true story, not at this school, but this is a story of my cousins, that they went to a school where TWE was only 1 strand, and Mark was able to go to the Gen Ed strand in the same school and get to still be with his brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I again apologize for if I mispronounce it. Patrick Geely? Sorry. What is it? Yealy.
I've never used my phone for this before. My name is Patrick Yealy. It's like a Y. And I live at 1215 Pittner Avenue. My daughter is a 1st grader at Bessie Rhodes, and we were planning on enrolling our son there next fall. I'm here to talk about my concerns regarding teachers and administrators at the school and to speak up for them. Obviously, we love our teachers and administrators and don't want to see their lives disrupted. On one level, this affects our families, obviously, but it's also a basic issue of fairness to them. To me, this is perhaps one of the biggest disruptors in this whole proposal. We know that there will be teacher attrition and turnover, and we're fearing a constant flux of new teachers and administrators. Basic common sense suggests that teachers won't be waiting around to be let go. They will very understandably seek out stable employment elsewhere. Although tenured teachers will be in short positions within the district, which is great to know. I mean, honestly, it's terrific. Non-tenured teachers will not necessarily. This in turn might affect non-tenured teachers at other schools. I don't know for sure, but this is just my sense of how this might work. The concern therefore extends beyond Bessie Rhodes to the district as a whole. Non-tenured teachers at lower levels might be pushed out to make room for tenured teachers who have to move from Bessie Rhodes. This is just a concern of mine that I'd like to see answered. We're concerned that this will lead to more substitute and temporary teachers who are less likely to be invested in our children's long-term success. As an educator myself, I believe that education is less a matter of curricular innovation, although that is obviously very important, and more one of stable ritual interactions with educators and fellow learners who invest objects of knowledge with rich symbolic significance over long periods of time. Students learn better in a nurturing and secure environment, we all know this. When we were considering which school to send our daughter to, we visited Bessie Rhodes, and we saw the person who was going to be, we didn't know at the time, our daughter's kindergarten teacher, and as she was walking down the hallway, she hugged a student going by who was in 4th or 5th grade, it seemed. And my wife and I love this sense of community and continuity and like to imagine that in a few years our daughter would be that 4th or 5th grader who had this long-term stable relationship with her teacher. So my question is, will our children lose this sense of continuity and comfort when they see their teachers leaving every year? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lisa Laude.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Laude, 1427 Church. I'd like to thank the board this evening for giving us an opportunity to speak. We appreciate the work that the board is doing thus far, and I am here tonight as an executive of the PTA at Bessie Rhodes and representing a number of parents who were unable to attend but have sent us emails. So I'm really just going to read what we have shared with the parents who have contacted us based on what we've read from all of you, the committee, and also from what Stacy has shared at our first meeting. So we would like the board to either confirm or correct the following statements. Bessie Rhodes will remain a global studies school. The dual language program will be in addition to our global studies platform, that you are not removing global studies. All of our beloved administration and teachers will not be fired next year. The dual language program will start only at the kindergarten level next year. The district will support teachers who can become bilingual certified. That there is still room for students who choose Rhodes for the global studies option. That this will not disrupt the district's commitment to an equity plan for all students. That this proposal was in part created based on the district-wide equity walk from 2016. That additional funding will be set aside for Rhodes in order to strengthen our Rhodes community and further build our global studies theme as we broaden access and opportunity for students with dual language. That this has not yet been voted on, and that we will have 2 additional meetings on November 15th and 30th, where parents can receive correct information. So that's what we will submit in email, and we would appreciate you confirming or correcting those statements. I do want to say that I am born and raised in Evanston, from a child of immigrants, trilingual family, 3 languages spoken at our home. We're former Dewey parents and now Bessie Rhodes parents. We love Bessie Rhodes, and we look forward to working with the board to continue our global studies as we add dual languages to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole Haleen.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm Nicole Haleen of 1681 Church Street, Evanston, Illinois.
I'm a parent and former TWE teacher at both Dewey and Willard Elementary Schools. I'm very supportive of the decision to expand the TWE program, particularly the goals of expanding the program in locations of high Spanish-speaking populations.
I'm sorry, can I just ask you to speak more directly into the mic?
Yes, hi. Expanding programs in locations of high Spanish-speaking populations and locations that would encourage greater participation by the underrepresented Black student populations in TWE and promote multicultural learning environment that is essential to the TWE program. I'm very pleased with the proposal to create a consolidated TWE school. The district recommended in its expansion proposal that it was ideal to have 2 or more strands of TWE with no single class strands in a building. While this is supported by research by Torres Guzman on key features of TWE programs, as well as Catherine Lindholm Leary's reviews of best practices in TWE programs, the 2016 and 2017 Equity Walk also highlighted concerns for the isolation of teachers and students in schools with single strands, which I also experienced as a former TWE teacher in 2 schools with single strands. TWE teachers in single-strand schools experience greater workloads and isolation from peers, which leads to higher rates of teacher turnover, as well as TWE students in single-strand programs experiencing social isolation from their peers in the general education program, which leads to program attrition in upper elementary and middle school years. Consolidation of neighborhood TWE schools can greater support students, teachers, and resources. Consolidation to an all-TWE school can increase the status of minority language to native Spanish speakers, as well as their academic performance, and facilitate second language learning for native English speakers. While I agree that the mission of Bessie Rhodes is consistent with the goals of TWE, expanding the TWE program to add 2 more strands to Bessie Rhodes alone will not solve the existing problem of isolation of students, teachers, and curricular resources in the remaining TWE schools. Greater consolidation of neighborhood schools means that the district could save money on that proposed $10,000 in library expenses that would be required to expand the program to Bessie Rhodes, as the consolidated TWE schools could combine their curricular resources and school libraries could be consolidated. One of the indicators receiving the greatest weight for considering expansion of the program was number of Spanish speakers by school area in which they live. That was the block school. In the proposal to expand to Bessie Rhodes, a recommendation was made to allocate $7,500 for transportation costs to support community engagement at school events. While transporting families could encourage greater participation, selecting a site closer to families' homes would save money and promote greater community participation. I currently live within the Willard Island, which is an isolated attendance zone and located 4 blocks from Dewey School, where my kindergarten neighbors ride the bus every day for up to an hour to and from school. The greatest, is that my time?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Powley.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Powley, 1216 Monroe. I'm an Oakton parent. I spoke to you several weeks ago at a board meeting about my concerns about underrepresentation of Black students among the English-speaking slots in the TWE program. There are 3 different ways to recap that the administration of the TWE program discriminates against Black students for those English-speaking slots. One is related to demographics and where the majority of Spanish speakers and the majority of African-American students live. One is related to class size and the way that the district manipulates class size and uses the magnet programs to manipulate class size. And third is the issue of sibling preference, which essentially becomes a proxy for race, with the white little brothers and sisters of white TWE students getting preference. I asked you that night, or begged you that night, to consider in expanding TWE, which I think is a great thing, to make sure that this other inequity wasn't also expanded. So as you scale up TWE, please don't scale up the disparities between Black and white students in the English-speaking slots. That was all before there was a proposal on the table for a particular school. So I'm back tonight to just get a readout on that, and I hope it'll be a part of your discussion. Understandably, I think the largest part of the discussion will focus on Bessie Rhodes, but I'd love to also hear what's going to happen around this Black-white disparity, and relatedly, what's going to happen at existing TWE schools like Oakton, which are just one-strand schools, both how they'll be, how their isolation will be addressed, and whether we'll see improvements in the equity issue in those single-strand schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Kimmel.
Thank you. Stephanie Kimmel, 9515 Crawford Avenue. I'm a proud District 65 alum and a parent of 2 Walker students. I just wanted to first say thank the board and the administration for letting us all discuss these proposed changes. We all know change is difficult, and I really appreciated all the research and the data that was presented in the memo from last month and this month. But I just wanted to say that I think some of the analysis of it is a little bit incomplete, and I think a little bit more work needs to be done. One of the memos mentions references the need to find ways to end the isolation for students in single-strand TWE schools, but there's really nothing in the memo that shares how the current single-strand schools will be impacted. What's going to happen at Willard, Dawes, Oakton. Also, in the cons section of the magnet program adding 2 TWE schools, no one added any con about what it's going to do to the community of families that currently attend the school. I think that's a really important omission. Also, I wanted to point out that there will be an impact on Walker and Lincoln, I would imagine, as well. Walker has currently 75 students at Rhodes, which is about 1/3 of the elementary population. Walker also has 61 students at King Arts. I don't think King Arts is going to have additional capacity to serve more students with this change in eliminating a magnet school. Also, Lincoln is one of the overcrowded schools, is my understanding, and they are the second highest number of students attending Rhodes and King. So how will these schools be impacted with this change? The last bullet in your memo from this month notes that a multi-year plan is needed and that the future of the single-strand TWE schools, I also imagine boundaries for attendance areas being moved, consolidated, et cetera. This seems like an opportune moment to take a look at those things all together. Making a change to Bessie Rhodes to change the whole school over to TWE, you can't really go back from that. Once you make that change, that's kind of going to be a done deal. You're not going to uproot those families again if that something else needs to change down the line. Also, I think looking at the data for special education, Bessie Rhodes currently has 6% of its students are receiving special education services, which is half of the elementary district. It just seems clear to me that changing this, if you look at the population at Washington Special Education and the other schools that have TWE, there will need to be additional resources if, say, the number of special ed students doubled.
Thank you.
But I hope you'll just decide to do what is best for the most children in the district, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bobby Burns.
Bobby Burns, 301 Custer, and I actually have a TWE kid at Dawes. We love the program. I won't kind of go into that, but I am a TWE kid. We like the program. Fifth Ward School. This seems like it would have been a wonderful opportunity for a Fifth Ward school, and I'm disappointed in everybody that was short-sighted and didn't see that as an opportunity. If this proposal is indeed approved, they will, of course, expand the boundaries so that more of the Fifth Ward will be included. And, of course, the Fifth Ward school would have been smack dab in the Fifth Ward, and I think this could have been a wonderful opportunity for that school, considering that it's already a kind of black and brown and mixed community. So I just wanted to note that. I think, no matter what happens, I think we can get more participation in the TWE program from the African American community if we just talk more to the Black community and give them more voice. I will say that, I'm part of the Evanston Collective. That is our mission is to support, organize, and empower African American families and ideas in Evanston. Esmales Nunez has been great, allowing us to create a committee that is now supported by the district. We have a meeting here November 16th, 6:30 p.m. in this room. Anybody who wants to participate, please come. But I think we need to do more than that. I think the reason why we don't get enough voice from our community is because we don't do enough outreach. I think the committee is a good piece, but I also think we need a point person that is going to focus on Black student achievement. This district is doing wonderful. I think equity work, we're moving in the right direction. But just like we've identified language as a barrier to achievement, just look at the African American student gap. I mean, it's clear that unfortunately the color of your skin is a barrier to achievement, and not because of any biological markers, but simply because it's tough, especially for low and moderate income African Americans, to insert themselves within these type of institutions, and in order to shape them in a way that can fit the needs of their families and their students. We need to make sure that we have someone focus every single day when they walk into this place in Black student achievement. It really is that simple. Any issue from the private sector to the public sector that anybody in this group understands, if you have a big problem, I think everybody would agree that in order to solve it, you need someone assigned and dedicated to solving that issue. I know this group should be tired of hearing this over and over and over again, especially when we're spending taxpayer money to act as if we're so confused about how to resolve it. And we shouldn't be. And so there are examples that are working in other communities. I want to give again another shout out to Esmales Nunez and this committee. That is a good thing because it truly empowers African American families. I think a step further in the right direction again is assigning somebody to Black student achievement. Thank you.
Thank you. Alice Berry.
I'm Alice Barry. I live at 1630 Main Street. I'm on the board of OPAL. After reading the proposal for the TWE program expansion, I have a lot of concerns. I think that if District 65 were different, I think if we already had racial equity here, if kids were achieving equitably, expanding TWE might be a great idea, but that is not the case, as recent achievement reports make all too clear. A number of sentences in this proposal kind of jumped off the page at me. The one about recommending additional transportation funds of $7,500 budgeted, focused on supporting community engagement events and transportation for families to these community events. The goal to ensure that families are supported in engaging with the school community, despite the fact that they may live in different parts of the city and have limited transportation options. I'd like to know why I've never seen a sentence like that having to do with Black students in District 65. I find it hard to escape the conclusion that the core of this issue is what is called opportunity hoarding. For anyone listening who doesn't know what that term means, it means devoting resources to serve a nice dessert to some kids who have already eaten a satisfying meal, while some other kids aren't even getting a whole meal, much less dessert. Why is it okay for some students to become fluent in a second language when some Black students aren't fluent yet in their native language? How about focusing instead of getting all the English-speaking children learning English super well enough to succeed in school and beyond? District 65 has admitted that it knows it needs to work on culturally relevant curriculum. When Black students in District 65 study history and culture, they're studying primarily European history and culture, the history and culture of people who don't look like them. This proposal devotes resources to studying the history and culture of Spanish-speaking peoples. I think we all know the importance of representation. When do Black students in Evanston get to study the history and culture of people who look like them? When do white students in Evanston get to appreciate the history and culture of African peoples? It's frustrating to see how little attention the African-centered curriculum gets by comparison with TWE. Some of the data in this recommendation, Appendix A, it really concerned me. It said nearly 100 parents were surveyed by phone. Only 20 of them were Black. I think there's about 2,000 Black students in District 65, so that means like less than 1% maybe of Black parents. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, my apologies if I'm mispronouncing. Sarkan Bhutan?
Good evening. My name is Serkan Bütün and I live in 311 Custer Avenue.
Can you be sure to speak into the microphone, please?
My name is Serkan Bütün and I live in 311 Custer Avenue. I have a son in Betsy Roads. He's in the 2nd grade and I also have a daughter. She hopefully will start in 3 years. When I first read that memo on Wednesday night, I had a hard time grasping what's really going on. So my biggest concern is there is not enough time for us parents to just fully understand what's going on. I'm a scientist myself and I don't have enough data right now to assess if this TWI, or I don't know what you call it, but I am not qualified to say it is not worth it or it works or it has any benefit in students' lives or their cultural or academic future. But I do know that bilingual students, and there's overwhelming evidence that students who has a bilingual background do well in their further life. So it appears that, I mean, I don't really have any reason to argue against was it TGI? TWE. All right. Okay. I just would like to, as a second point, give a glimpse of a recent immigrant family like myself. And, you know, we came here 5 years ago and when my son was about to enroll for kindergarten, I was asking around what other families like me, what are their experiences, and most of them, especially when their kids are enrolled in suburban neighborhoods, they felt like, you know, they're not a part of that community because of less diversity. And we were lucky because we were living in Evanston. There's a huge diversity in here. And since my home happened to be in Lincoln Elementary neighborhood, we were given the opportunity to choose Betsy Roads as an alternative because of overcrowdedness. So we were really happy. And my son loves there. He loves his friends. He loves his teachers and everything. But now, since, you know, we are already a bilingual family at home, we're trying to keep them not to forget their native language. And I don't really think I would enroll my daughter in Betsy Roads if this program expands to Betsy Roads. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker, Taishia Nix. Taishia Nix, sorry.
I did not prepare a speech like everybody else, but again, I'm the PTA president at Betsy Roads Magnet School, and we have heard both sides of this thing. Can you hear me?
Into the...
What'd you say, Vicki? Oh, 143 Custer. Thanks for keeping me in the loop. I do, like I said, I've heard a lot of commentary from parents for both sides of this thing, and I do support TWE, but I also support the district, you know, helping all children. So there were definitely some good points made here about, you know, Black and brown children in the district, and we definitely support working with the district and working with the board to not make this a one-year thing and a gradual thing to improve the learning and productivity for all children in our school. And like I said, I don't have any thing planned or written out today, and especially had to run and go get my baby. But I definitely thank the district, and I thank Stacy for coming to the school to speak to us impromptu and to provide us some information, and look forward to receiving more information as you guys work through this to make sure that it is the best thing for all children in our school and district. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who spoke. We will now move on to our discussion of the TWE proposal.
Possible to take a 3-minute
Oh,
break? Just
Sure. We're going to take a quick break.
Do you mind?
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then we'll come back and start the discussion. So I want to again thank everyone who spoke this evening. We are still in discussion on nothing is being voted on tonight, so I just want to clarify that. We are still discussing the proposal, the process. We specifically set aside this meeting as well as 2 additional meetings before we vote so that we can more fully understand what people's concerns are and help manage the change for whatever the site location is, because there will be considerable change to consider, and it is important to us that we hear people's feedback and concerns so that we can address them. So we have set aside time in the process to be able to do that. So with that, Dr. Gorin, if you have any.
And let me also offer my thanks, my sincere thanks to the families associated with Bessie Rhodes and across the community for the important comments that we just received, and we really appreciate them, and we encourage you to send more, whether it's through email or contacting any of us. I want to provide for just a few moments a little bit of context on the recommendation that we bring forward to the board tonight, fully recognizing that we have several board meetings ahead of us before you as a board will make a decision. District 65 provided TWE as our bilingual services for our Spanish-speaking, our Spanish-dominant students for over a decade. I guess this is the 10th year of going in. The research on TWE shows that this is the best practices and that it actually helps Spanish-dominant children achieve proficiency in English. The model works best when and is most effective when the classes are 50% Spanish speakers and 50% English speakers. Given the growth that has occurred in Evanston over the years, and especially most recently with our Spanish-dominant children in District 65, we're now out of balance. We're at about 65% Spanish-speaking kids and 35% English-speaking kids in the TWE program. And again, the most effective way of taking this program and working it well is at a 50-50 balance. So we have a need. We have a need to add 2 strands to serve the needs of our English language learners and our Spanish language learners who participate in TWE and make the program work. This work, as many of the commentators provided as well, falls clearly within the equity agenda that we are pursuing and that we are engaged in as a board and as a district. As many of you know, last year our equity consultant, Corey Wallace, noted through extensive community input across her visits across all 18 schools and programs, that District 65 needs to address the isolation of the TWE program. And that District 65 needs to address the fact, as several commentators said, that many Black and African American students are not represented well in TWE. And that's something that indeed we are working on. I just want to place even larger context of our equity work because we're making steady progress, and the recommendation that we have tonight is part of the work that we're doing and the responses to the equity report from last year and the commitment we have. So in our work on equity, we are doing comprehensive racial identity training across the district, whether it's at the administrative level, the board level, or the teacher and staff level. We've shifted our algebra programming to detrack our algebra at 8th grade and to offer all children access to Algebra 1. We are taking a careful look at the request from Opal that they released during their last press conference and that was mentioned earlier tonight. And the expansion of TWE into a setting where there would be two strands rather than one isolated strand is really important and is in direct response to our equity report. We recognize, and several commentators said this tonight as well, that Bessie Rhodes has had a history of transitions and movement within the school. And I just want to recognize that. We see this move as a way to solidify the emphasis on global studies and a way of including a focus on dual language. So we offer the recommendations tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Stacy in a minute and to Amy to really recognize that we have a lot on the table, and to recognize that in inviting community members and family members in tonight, that we have two more opportunities as well. And just to clarify, on November 20th, which is the next board meeting, and then on December 4th. So with that, let me turn it over to Stacy.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the school board, thank you to Bessie Rhodes, and thank you very much to the parents that did come out this evening to share both support and their concerns and challenges with our proposal. Tonight, as we present, we're going to provide some overview on the program and some history. We'll move into the recommendation and some of the rationale in the process. I do hope that in the process of the presentation tonight, we can address some of the questions that came up, and we'll also work on following up on those questions at a future time. Amy Correa is going to start tonight with a little bit of the history and overview of the program.
As Stacy said, I'm going to give the overview of the program, and it's very quick. And then she'll go into the rationale, site selection, and recommendations. Dual language is also known as two-way immersion, or TWE. It is an increasingly popular form of bilingual education in the United States, in which English-speaking children and Spanish language speakers learn together in the same classroom. The goals of TWE program include academic achievement for all students, high levels of bilingualism and biliteracy in both English and Spanish, and an increased cultural competence. It's important to remember that TWE frames bilingual education as an enrichment rather than remediation, and uses the students' home languages and resources both in English and in Spanish. Again, to reiterate the program goals: 1, academic achievement for all students, high level of bilingualism and biliteracy in English and in Spanish, and increased cultural competence. District 65, a little bit of the history. It is grades K through 5. We have a Spanish-English dual language program. It began about 2001, about a little bit more than a decade ago. It has 5 schools: Dawes, Dewey, Oakton, Washington, and Willard, all having one strand with the exception of Washington. It serves as a combination of Spanish-speaking English learners and students who apply to participate via a lottery system, which are English dominant. The two-way immersion model is research-based and is considered by experts in bilingual education to be the most effective model for educating English learners. Now, what we need to do, why do we need to expand the program? I'll let Stacy talk on that.
I know one of the concerns that was brought up by one of the speakers was that possibly there was only one site, one source of research around two-way immersion programming, Thomas and Collier. At the end of the board memo that's attached in this packet, we do reference several other articles and resources. I do think it's extremely important to understand that the two-way immersion program dual language and its whole is a very well-researched solution and is seen as being the model that best supports English language acquisition for native Spanish-speaking or native speakers of another language. And so we are basing this proposal on a very solid set of research, and we feel very confident when we look both at the research as well as what's happened in District 65 and the recommendation that we have. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So what I want to talk about is a quick recap of why we see it as being necessary to expand TWE, and Dr. Gorin did touch on a few of these things. There are 4 primary reasons for expanding the two-way immersion program. 1 is the increase in student need, 2 is the increase in community demand, 3, program efficiency, and 4, commitment to equity. Specifically, when we talk about an increase in student need, Dr. Gorin mentioned that originally research states that the program functions best when it's a 50-50 model. 50% native English speakers, 50% speakers from a second language, and in this case, Spanish. In 2007, 2008, we were at a perfect 50-50. As we've looked at our data over the last several years, we've been quite skewed. As 2016-17, we were 65-35, and we remain right at that 65-35 for this year as well. Specifically, when we look at our schools, it's important to understand that this distribution varies school to school. The schools where we have the greatest kind of disproportionate balance are Willard School, where 74% of our students are native Spanish speakers and 26% native English speakers, and at Dawes, where we're 78%. Something very, very important to realize is that that is not the optimal condition for our native Spanish speakers or our native English speakers. One of the things that Amy spoke about a moment ago is that the two-way immersion program is designed to build off of students' strengths. And so having students that are coming strong in Spanish and strong in English supports each other's language acquisition, and that balance is important for the success of the program. So that really addresses condition number 1 for why it is that we need to expand the program, and that is that we have native Spanish-speaking demand and need that supports the expansion of the program, and getting to a 50-50 model restores us to some of the efficacy of the implementation of our model. Second, analysis of community demand. So we have demand from our native Spanish-speaking families. We also addressed in our previous board meeting that about 85 to 90% of our native-speaking Spanish families do opt into our two-way immersion program. We also have demand from our English-speaking families. This slide illustrates that in 2012-2013, we had 123 applications to the TWE program. We were able to accept 56 of those applications. The reason we could accept 56 of those applications is that we were closer to a 50-50 balance. By 2016-2017, we had 140 applications, and we were only able to accept 32% of those applications, and that was 45 seats. And again, the seats for the native English speakers are decreasing because we're not able to maintain that 50-50 model, which is best implementation and best support for our students. Another aspect of community demand is when we look beyond our numbers, we really see that the two-way immersion program supports the community value of diversity. We bring students from different backgrounds, different ethnicities and different languages together in one classroom, build a community of learners focused on high academic achievement, bilingualism, biliteracy, and multicultural education. This is one of the aspects that we really felt was a strong intersection with the Bessie Rose School Global Studies model. We see two-way immersion as supplementing and strengthening the global studies model, not supplanting that. Language acquisition, language proficiency is an aspect that is valued within global studies models and is an important component that we can strengthen by adding the two-way immersion program to the Bessie Rhodes School of Global Studies. Additionally, bilingualism truly is a global skill valued by parents and community and jobs and beyond. Program efficacy, this is the Thomas and Collier graph that was referenced in the parents' comments. This is a significant study that is supported by other research that has been done, and it illustrates that this program, dual language, two-way immersion, is the most successful long-term solution for language acquisition for students to exit strong in English and strong in Spanish. Internally in our District 65, the research, I included more data in our last board packet. I pulled it down to a single slide. This particular slide illustrates that our students, native Spanish-speaking students, when they enter
our two-way immersion program actually have a score lower on our access test, indicating that they have longer to go in their language acquisition learning in order to reach proficiency as determined by the access test by the state of Illinois. What this illustrates is that those students were scoring at lower levels than our students in our ESL program or WAVE students in first grade, but what we see is through their experience in the two-way immersion program that their learning accelerates and they actually end up scoring higher on the access test in the later grades, outpacing the growth that students in that WAVE services or in our ESL program experience. And so this is one illustration of the success of the two-way immersion program. We've also heard from a couple different speakers tonight, as well as Dr. Gorin, about District 65's commitment to equity. When we speak about equity, we're really looking for solutions that can support the growth of all students while closing the achievement and opportunity gaps that we see in District 65. The two-way immersion program taps into several important points that are in our district equity statement. A couple that really ring strongly to me are that it honors and builds on the strengths and assets of every student. Building on the strengths of students is at the heart of the two-way immersion model. It says that the language and the culture that you bring to school is a value, it is a strength, and that it is going to be merged with other strengths from other students in order to create the strongest possible learning environment for language acquisition for native Spanish speakers and with native English speakers benefiting as well. We also really take a look at the fact that this is a way to provide opportunities and resources for students who do need and require those supports and resources. It's an opportunity to attract and retain a diverse workforce, and it is a place where our two-way immersion teachers have led our work in culturally relevant and responsive practices. It is at the heart of the model, and it is at the heart of their work. And so we want to be able to continue to support and expand those practices while we are deepening that in other leaders and areas of work in our district. Specifically, I know the equity walk pieces have been referenced, but I do think that it is incredibly important to call out that the equity walks highlighted the concerns about isolations for two-way immersion teachers and students. A couple people have mentioned tonight that the current proposal does not yet speak to grouping other TWE strands. We believe that it was important to come forward with a proposal to address the 65-35 balance, get us back to a 50-50 in the program. And then the last bullet of the memo does say that part of our work going forward needs to be to create a long-term plan that addresses the isolation of the two-way immersion strands that do exist in District 65, in addition to looking at dual language program in our middle schools. So specifically, we do this proposal and was strongly influenced by this desire to not perpetuate and continue that isolation and to look for opportunities to create the best possible learning environment for two-way immersion strands that benefit both native Spanish speakers and native English speakers. We also see that there is an underrepresentation of black students in the two-way immersion program, and we'll speak a little bit about that in our recommendation tonight, as that was central to our thinking as well. Shifting a little bit into site selection considerations, in our last board meeting, I shared essentially a longer list of site selection considerations. We did include and consider all of those considerations. These are the elements that rose to the top as being the most significant and the most highly weighted. The first really addresses the isolation factor. One of the things that we looked at very specifically is if we added two-way immersion strands to a current school, could we, one, build off of one of two things: add strands to get to a point where we did not have an isolated strand, or avoid having single strands of another program. An example of this would be if I took an existing TWE school, if I took Dawes, for instance, they have 3 classes per grade. One is already TWE. If we were to add another TWE strand at Dawes, that would leave a single strand of monolingual English classes. And that single strand, regardless of program, does create isolation for students and does break down opportunities for collaboration and opportunities for a broader community building within schools. And so we really did look very carefully at where is it that we could group strands and not leave a single strand of a program within any school. We did also look pretty heavily at monolingual class size, and the reason for this is that When we do put a two-way immersion program, when we create a two-way immersion strand, a certain number of seats are held for native Spanish speakers. That does have an impact potentially on class sizes in a neighborhood school. And so we wanted to know that based on class sizes, we had the opportunity to add this program without creating a significantly negative impact on displacing other families. I do realize that in going into a magnet school, depending on the family's openness to the program, that does create potential for displacement. And that was clear within the comments tonight and within our conversations. And the challenge is weighing displacement at a neighborhood school as opposed to a magnet school. We also did look very specifically at where native Spanish speakers are living in Evanston. We looked at where the populations are growing. We took a look at projected enrollment by neighborhood schools in an effort to figure out, to make sure that the decisions we were making would work long-term in regards to enrollment patterns. The school culture and openness, this moving a two-way immersion program into a school is an important move because we want to make sure that we are embracing all members of that school community. We want to make sure that we are thinking broadly about the students that are arriving as well as the students that are there and the families, and that does speak a little bit to some of the money that is reserved for transportation and family engagement, as well as the opportunity for kind of a community building project in the first year. So these are some critical pieces. We did also look at TWE program previous performance or school academic performance in order to assess kind of the academic readiness for a school. With these considerations in mind, and with the findings from the equity walk really weighing heavily on our decision process, we've come forward with the recommendation that we believe that the two-way immersion program should add 2 strands at the Dr. Bessie Rhodes School of Global Studies. Particular reasons for this recommendation include, 1, we see a very strong alignment between the goals of a two-way immersion program and the goals of a global studies school. The opportunity to put a program inside of Bessie Rhodes Global Studies that emphasizes culture, that supports language acquisition, and we see that there's strong opportunity for alignment and support there. So that's reason number 1, because we see strong alignment. In looking at global studies model, language acquisition is a very important part of a global studies school model, and the opportunity for students to experience 2 languages on a daily basis for 9 years and to exit bilingual and biliterate is a strong opportunity to strengthen the global schools model. Secondly, there's an opportunity at Bessie Rhodes to create essentially a wall-to-wall dual language school. Our model asks for us to create allocations of language learning across the day. By moving to potentially a wall-to-wall school model, we have an opportunity for students to hear Spanish and English in physical education, to hear Spanish and English in the arts, to hear Spanish and English throughout the day, which creates greater opportunities for students to experience that language and to learn and acquire that language. The value for a student who perhaps maybe is not feeling positively about their literacy acquisition or the math acquisition to go into a physical education course or go into an arts course and hear their language valued and have that opportunity to continue their language acquisition is a great way of strengthening the program and enhancing students' opportunities for success in language acquisition in both languages. Third, Bessie Rhodes has an attendance preference area in the 5th Ward. It's north of Church Street, and essentially that area is populated, has a greater concentration of Black families as well as Latino families within those bounds. We see this as an opportunity to create greater access to the TWE program for Black families. And so that's an important consideration as we work to think about how to ensure that we are offsetting some of the underrepresentation of Black families within our two-way immersion program. We also see that there's a growing native Spanish-speaking population in North Evanston, and at this point in time we have 1 TWE strand at Willard in the northern end of Evanston, and this is a rapidly growing population. So the recommendation around Bessie Rhodes creates further TWE strands in proximity of the growing population in North Evanston. And lastly, the addition to the TWE program at Bessie Rhodes we see as also an opportunity to more fully maximize the enrollment at the school. Two-way immersion program providing language exposure, multicultural exposure through 9 straight years to become bilingual, biliterate, and have high levels of academic achievement is a way to draw more families to the school. And at this point, we have average class size, and class size is clearly vary class to class, grade to grade, but average class size at Bessie Rhodes is 19 students, and so there is some more opportunity for students to be able to access Bessie Rhodes. So these are the elements of the recommendation that we felt strongest that drew us towards Dr. Bessie Rhodes School of Global Studies. I do want to underscore a few things that were raised earlier. The recommendation is to start next year with 2 kindergarten classrooms and to grow the program out year at a time. That aspect of it is important to understand. So that is, I think, extremely key. And I lost track of my second thought, but it might come back. All right. So tonight, when you're looking at your board packet, there are also some additional recommendations that we think are extremely important to move forward with this recommendation. First, there is a recommendation to allocate some family engagement funds. This is built into the budget annually going forward, committed to family engagement and transportation. And this is actually modeled after some work that was done at Walker School last year, when for some family and community engagement events, they ran transportation to the events for families in the evening and saw a very significant increase in participation in those events and had very positive feedback on that opportunity. What was seen here is that Bessie Rhodes clearly draws from a wide range of the community. We know that two-way immersion students that are native Spanish speakers are more likely to come from low-income families than our traditional District 65 student. So this is a way to essentially give Bessie Rhodes some money to be able to think about how do we ensure that we provide greater access and opportunity for all families to community events as we go forward. So there's an opportunity to use some of these funds for creation of community events as well as for transportation to those events to create a tighter school community with this shift in mind. The second bullet is that we want to review and recommend changes to the Magnet School and Programs Policy 7:32, including but not limited to adding preference for younger siblings of families currently enrolled at Bessie Rhodes. One of the things that we have heard and we really did want to pay attention to the best state that we could is that there are families that are deeply committed to Bessie Rhodes, and we appreciate those families that are committed to Bessie Rhodes. We understand that the potential of adding a two-way immersion program to Bessie Rhodes School of Global Studies is a challenge because it's not what they initially signed up for, but what this would provide is an opportunity for these families to be preferenced for younger siblings of students that are currently enrolled at Bessie Rhodes to be preferenced into the kindergarten classrooms through the two-way immersion program. So if there's a student in second grade that has a younger sibling who's 3 or 4 years old, this would give these families preference to the English-speaking seats in the two-way immersion program at Bessie Rhodes. We also see this as a way we do see this as a way of honoring the commitment of the Bessie Rhodes families and for maintaining some continuity for those families should they choose to have their students come to Bessie Rhodes to be part of the two-way immersion program. We are recommending that this preference be put above the sibling preference for the two-way immersion program so that the Bessie Rhodes preference should be above the TWE sibling preference. And the reason for this is to ensure, again, that Bessie Rhodes families that have native English-speaking students could have access to those seats at Bessie Rhodes and therefore continue to have their students and their family at Bessie Rhodes. The third piece that is part of this recommendation is that we need to and will strengthen the outreach to the Black community about the District 65 programs, most focused on culturally relevant and responsive practices. And in this case, we're saying we will increase the outreach with the two-way immersion program. I have also been working with Ismaelis Nunez, and we're working on making connection to some key community groups, and we've done some additional outreach to Black families within the last several weeks to get their feedback, Black families in the TWE program, to get their feedback on the program and their thoughts and ideas about how we can best, one, reach out to families to engage them and to hear how we can continue to strengthen or improve their experience with the two-way immersion program. And we do know that part of the feedback we get on the experience is that they would like to see greater representation of black students in those classrooms, so they don't need to feel like they're choosing between having black classmates and learning Spanish. In regards to financial impact, we have a number of different things that we've worked into the budget. I think there are a couple important categories. One is curriculum and instruction materials. We are allocating $7,500 annually around curricular materials. This would allow us to essentially provide the Spanish language materials and supports for a two-way immersion program. We have all the English curricular supports in those classrooms right now. Specifically, it's thinking about everyday math, reference specs in Spanish, classroom libraries in Spanish, things along those lines. We also have money allocated to the library over time. Since we're growing out gradually, there's $10,000 initially that would be focused on some of those early reading or books targeted towards kindergartners and first graders, as well as interactive read-alouds and other books that we can overall strengthen the Bessie Rhodes Library in regards to multicultural literature. So it's an opportunity to strengthen some of the books in the global studies side while also beginning to build out the Spanish language library books. We have money allocated for professional learning because part of this is to continue to grow our educators in their understanding of working with second language students, as well as their understanding of how to implement a two-way immersion program. So we've allocated money annually. There are larger bumps in year 3 and year 6 because that's the point where we're moving into 2nd and 3rd grade, and again moving from 5th to 6th grade, and we think about adding staff gradually. We'll need to maintain that ongoing learning. We have taken a look at busing costs, and we do not foresee that there will be additional busing costs at this time. We do have space and capacity on our Bessie Rhodes buses right now, and when we do some analysis around families that are paying for transportation, not paying for transportation, and demographics, we see it as being actually kind of a net zero cost for transportation at this point. A couple other quick things in regards to kind of startup. Our beginning first year costs are higher because we do have $15,000 reserved for essentially a community building project. The initial thinking on that is that may be a community art project or something along those lines, but an opportunity to bring Bessie Rhodes families together, existing Bessie Rhodes families and new members of our TWE community, to really do something symbolic in the space that can embrace both global studies and the addition of the two-way immersion program. Lastly is staffing. In our two-way immersion program, we allocate 1 teaching assistant essentially for every 6 classes. And so this budget allocates 1 teaching assistant for the first 3 years that would work between our first kind of 6 classes, K1 and 2, and then adds a second teaching assistant in the 4th year, and that essentially would fill out our staffing costs. The budget shows the grow-out phases. The only costs that do continue into the future once we hit the 8th grade are the teaching assistant and the family engagement costs. The rest, once we've made the conversion across all grades, would be our standard running expenses for maintaining a classroom in District 65. I wanted to make sure, so I did go to Bessie Rhodes on Friday and met with parents at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And what I've added here is some of the kind of questions and concerns that have been raised by the community to date. I think it does echo some of what we heard today. Part of our job, as I see it say in the next steps of the memo, and I'll stay again on the next slide, our goal is to continue to work with the community and to find a way to make this a strong recommendation going forward, because we do strongly believe that the two-way immersion program and global studies can be a very good fit. So it is to hear these concerns and work to address them to the best we can. So these are the kind of concerns that were captured in the engagements on Friday. Next steps, I am in the process of engaging school leadership, teacher leadership, and parent leadership to discuss the program and the rationale for site selection with Amy and other members of our team. We're also working with stakeholders, including staff and families, to hear and respond to those concerns. We're going to continue to do outreach to native Spanish-speaking families and black families to improve and essentially get more information on how to improve the program and how to improve our outreach on the program. And that work is ongoing. And then pending approval by the school board, we need to look at recruiting students for the program for the selected site, finalizing the implementation model, developing staffing plan, while also really thinking about a transition plan for general education teachers that are being displaced. There was a comment made earlier about, please verify whether or not all teachers would be dismissed from Bessie Rhodes next year. That is by no means the intention. We value Bessie Rhodes teachers. We want to be responsive to the needs of our students in our district, and the transition of staff would be very gradual over time. We know that the transition would occur for our 2 kindergarten teachers next year, as well as for limited support staff, and that process would be done gradually. We'd like to think that we can manage a fair amount of the support staff through attrition and movement around the folks that work across schools. And so we want to be as sensitive to that as possible because, again, we do value the work of our Bessie Rhodes teachers. This is not a reflection on them or their ability. It's a reflection on what we see as being the best possible academic move for our district to support the range of learners that we serve. And then the last piece of this is that we do need to work on a multi-year plan for our English language learners. This gets us through the first step, which is to get us to an adequate number of two-way immersion strands to serve the native Spanish speakers that we have in the district. Then we need to continue to look at isolation and come up with an appropriate plan for grouping those strands and think about middle school two-way immersion program. This recommendation does get us on track also for a middle school two-way immersion dual language program. All right, questions?
Thank you very much. And thank you. I appreciate the memo and the presentation. I know as I was reading it and I was coming up with questions, they tended to be answered further on in the memo. So I really appreciate all the thought that you and the team put into it.
Thank you.
The board, we get started with questions. Anybody who wants to start?
I'm happy to throw a couple
All
out
right,
there.
go ahead, Joey.
Some of these won't be answered right now. So let me preface by saying that I know that. Thank you for all the work put into this. And we heard from a lot of people tonight. And it just in conversation about this, I know this wasn't a mission to find out like the weakest school site to put TWE. This is not about Bessie Rhodes or a judgment on that. So a couple of things. One is it's really hard to think about. I know this is a first step, but it's really hard to think about it in the context of a multi-year plan when we don't know what's after. So in terms of time frame for getting a multi-year plan together, what that looks like, this is a plan that balances the TWE program by adding something to Bessie Rhodes, so it's incremental, but it doesn't address any of the issues in the other buildings. The Thomas and Collier graph, which shows TWE as a great model, assuming you go beyond 5th grade, right, 6th through 12th, well, we still don't do that in all the other strands. Can you give us an idea of the time frame for when the long-range plan comes into play?
So Bessie Rhodes, the recommendation to have TWE added to Bessie Rhodes is an illustration of what I think we can potentially move to, which is an opportunity for students to have two-way immersion program in kindergarten through 8th grade, and an opportunity for students to be able to experience it in an environment that is more supportive of multicultural identities and to create a greater opportunity for supports in either language. In regards to timeline, I see us really looking at potential reorganization of TWE strands over the remainder of this school year. That needs to be done somewhat simultaneously with our thinking about middle school dual language, because depending on where those TWE strands ultimately end up, and that is a change process that will take time, that would indicate then which middle school or middle schools we would want to focus on creating dual language programming, depending on where those strands ultimately collect. And I think this opportunity to move to a dual language school, to move to a school that has wall-to-wall dual language programming allows us to really think about those opportunities in the same time.
Thank you. And I think what you said is really important because we've had several conversations about this along the way over the past months. And I realize that some people get surprised by the announcements of recommendations, but you just alluded to the fact that this is a conversation that will impact more than just Bessie Rhodes at some point.
In time, in order
in
to
time.
address the isolation that's been raised, that we would need to impact more than Bessie Rhodes.
I just think it's at some point that will come back to us. And one more question that's a little bit more acute, and then I want to share the mic. We heard earlier about the tale of two students from one of our speakers. And in a wall-to-wall program that's grown out K through 8, where all the staff are bilingual, where the focus is on biliteracy, does that student that has learning issues have a better chance at being supported when all the staff in the building are working under that model with that training and with those skills differently than in some of our other sites where that's not necessarily the case?
There is research that absolutely supports that that student would have a better opportunity for success in a building that is oriented and focused on creating success for students that are similar to that individual. And so we need to understand that there are bilingual schools that operate throughout the country that educate all students. And so we can take that research, we can also learn from others, and the idea really of the opportunity of a wall-to-wall dual language school is to put our arms around all learners and to allow them to be successful in that environment.
And when you're saying wall-to-wall, you're not just talking about specialist teachers, you're talking about special ed resource teachers, speech pathologists, social workers, everybody.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Sergio?
I want to thank you for, again, putting this presentation together and doing all the research. So it's incredible. I feel like SUNY, again, I had a lot of questions as I read through the memo, but as I progressed, I mean, there was quite a bit answered. There are some things that I would like to see. One is that, again, if we can have this presentation done in Spanish and maybe recorded in Spanish, and then we can kind of share out to folks who can't be here, who are working those second, third shift jobs that just can't make it out here, right? You know, we're all very lucky to be in this room and to have the time to be able to have these discussions. But we know that there's folks right now who are working hard, but again, care just as much about having access to these wonderful opportunities that are being presented for our two-way immersion program, and also having access to global studies. I'd also like to see a little bit more information about the global studies program, how that unfolds. Again, I see a lot of parents expressed how, again, it is such a incredible concept and framework to work off of, right? So what is it that our two-way immersion students are going to experience and their families are going to experience once they get there? So maybe in future, in subsequent meetings, you know, we can add a little bit of information so the board can be a little bit more informed. I know I could use a little bit more information about, okay, so what does global studies look like? I looked at Bessie Rhodes' website, and I got the gist of it, which again, it sounds really exciting, sounds really great in regards to building the global citizens who are critical thinkers and really have this global perspective and appreciate different perspectives. So, I mean, I really see the value in it, and I would love to see it, you know, as a framework, you know, as something that we embed in all schools. Also, you know, would it be possible, I mean, to continue having Mandarin? I mean, I would love to have Spanish and Black students, you know, have access to Mandarin. I was lucky enough to go to a high school, Lakeview High School, that probably is probably still the only school, I don't know if it is, but back in the 80s was the only school that offered Mandarin. And actually, my funny story, my French teacher, her name was Miss Chen, so she was a Chinese teacher, but she knew 3-4 languages, and she encouraged me, you know, Sergio, so she called me Serge, why don't you take my Mandarin class? And I'm like, okay, and I thought it was a great experience. I took it for 2 years, but then I got priced out of my neighborhood. So, but I thought, gosh, if I could have continued, right, and to have access to that, and to be trilingual, you know, quadrilingual, for me that's the dream, and I'd love to see everybody, every student and every family have access to as many languages as possible that we can incorporate into our district. I mean, and to look for examples. I mean, again, a similar district is Schaumburg. You know, Schaumburg does provide a Mandarin track. They provide a Spanish two-way immersion track. So there are models, you know, in the area that we can refer to as we think about the long-term unfolding of how we, you know, service our students, and again, expose them and give them access to this global perspective and to culturally and linguistically relevant and appropriate practice. I do have a question for Amy. Amy, what do you see? I know you're newer to the district, but what do you see are some of the needs and things that we can improve to tweak TWE? Again, I think TWE is, again, it's a great program, but I do believe, and I've heard from parents and teachers, that there are things that can be improved. You know, and in your perspective, in regards to having talked to, you know, your colleagues and teachers across the district in the TWE program, I mean, what do you see as things that we can tweak for TWE to ensure that we, you know, that we provide a high quality program?
Well, one of the things I've noticed as I started having kind of conversations with teachers and being in classrooms is what I noticed is that we need to have a more common language. I think that some teachers in TWE have been here since 2001 and some are new, and perhaps that same language and the same expectations for students and for the program itself is important. And I think that any child coming from any one of those 5 schools, if they go to one of the other schools, they should have equal access and programming should be the same. So I would just work on that first, really developing a common language around what dual language is, making sure that everyone that have come from different places and times all share the same understanding of what good practice in dual language looks like.
I think just kind of touching on that a little bit, one of the things that we've talked about considering as in the potential of having the TWE program at Bessie Rhodes is looking to some of our other TWE educators in District 65 potentially to come to Bessie Rhodes so that we could have one existing D65 TWE teacher there at each grade at a minimum to help with that bridging of knowledge from our other TWE strands and schools as we build that out.
And again, I want to reiterate, I mean, I know we had folks from Mopal here talk about and a couple of other folks who are really concerned about, you know, access for Black students to high quality educational experience, and particularly, you know, looking at ACC. And I know we'll talk about this later, but again, I am supportive of ensuring that we really look at ACC and try to find ways that we can support it. And you know, as I've talked about this before. I've mentioned that I would like to see it embedded, right, like in our social studies across the district in regards to how. So we don't wait for February to be Black History Month, but every week or every time we have a social studies unit, we learn about Black students, we learn about Latinos and Afro-Latino diaspora. But again, that is coming up. That's the next discussion. But
and I think one of the things that our educators and our parents have really voiced is the need to move our social studies curriculum review up, and that is something that I see as being imminent for us, which means that we'd initiate a social studies curriculum review later this year. And central to that is really ensuring that there's a more multicultural, less Eurocentric perspective to the way we're approaching our history.
And let's see if I got something else. So, you know, some of the things that I've heard, and again, before I became a board member, I was engaging, you know, with community groups and talking to some of our TWE teachers as well as parents. And I know some of the concerns that our native Spanish-speaking parents have expressed with me is again trying to make sure that you know, we really value the Spanish language. I think I think in TWE in regards to how we should elevate the way we assess it and the way we use it. I think that's something that we can tweak, and I hope that as we have these conversations and as this unfolds, that we really do review how we support the language in our curriculum as well as practice and within the classroom and in professional development and also in regards to curricular decisions. I've heard from teachers that they sometimes feel excluded from curricular decisions, or it's an after effect, or they'll get informed afterwards in regards to a curricular decision, and they'll ask for, okay, well, is there any bilingual supports for this curriculum? And the curriculum decision was made, but there were no considerations around bilingual students and special ed students at times. So just to be mindful as we continue with this process.
Should we go down the line? Sure.
Okay. Well, a number of folks have left, but I wanted to thank everyone who came tonight and spoke. And this is really an important part of our process, and it's critical that we hear your voices in addition to the great work that I believe has been done by the administration and outreach thus far. But it has hearing those voices and kind of concerns across the board helps us fine-tune, think about things differently. And so a couple of the things I wanted to call out related to things that I heard earlier, and some of which you touched on in your component around community engagement. But first is just the general concern, and a very valid concern, and this would happen anywhere we would expand TWE to, in terms of disruption, concerns about our teachers, concerns about attrition, and how can we encourage teachers to stay as they're looking towards, as the program moves through the grades. And so I think that that's something that we have to give additional thought to, and I think we should try to think out of the box. I don't know if there are any particular ways that we could work with our teachers unions and look at potentially incentives. Lots of organizations have stay incentives when there's a time of change, and it is really important to the children and the families, as well as to the teachers and the culture of Bessie Rhodes or any organization, any school that we would be expanding to try to preserve as much of that continuity as possible and stability. And I'm hearing that loud and clear. So if there are other ways that we could think about being more creative and encouraging and helping our teachers to make the choice to stay as long as we can, I know that many of those teachers we could also would potentially find other places in the district, but encouraging them to stay through this transition. So that's one thing. Another piece that was brought up, and I think is a really valid one for us to look at, and maybe this could be for a subsequent conversation, is because Walker and Lincoln are the primary, not the primary, but the two top feeder schools to Bessie Rhodes, what would it look like, and have we thought through that, assumptions around potentially families that decide that they are not going to stay in TWE and go back to their home school or their neighborhood school? What would that look like in terms of impact on those schools? And could we have some idea about the range of impacts that could have? I think that was a good point. Another point that I wanted to draw out, and this is for me, and I think I would hope for everyone here, the work that we're doing is not an either or in terms of equity. It is a both and. We have to be vigilant about our work to better resource ACC, and we've been talking about that for some time. There is a redesign in process for the ACC program, and I think it's really important for us and for everyone to understand that we have to do both these things, and we can do both these things. And so I took a couple comments around opportunity hoarding very seriously, because A, the TWE program is not that. And B, the work that we do here around equity, around improving opportunities for our Black and brown children are both critical. And we do need to have a sense of urgency of both. And I'm convinced that we can do both. And I'm convinced that this team, with the work of the community and the involvement, we can do both. So I wanted to make that point, because and to echo what Sergio said, certainly we have not properly resourced ACC in the past, and we do need to do a better job, and we are resourcing it better now, or at least through the redesign, and we'll look to the spring, I believe, as we look down the road for that, so that was important. I think the final major point was, or not major, but the final other point I wanted to point out was relative to Mandarin. I have first-generation children. Unfortunately, we gave up too early. We were doing Chinese school, Saturday Chinese school from, like 3 to 7, and then we couldn't maintain it, and that's unfortunate. I wonder about, just in terms of Bessie Rhodes and the students there and their Mandarin acquisition, because I do think it's important, it's a wonderful thing to be able to offer. I wonder how those students are acquiring language. Not that that's the sole purpose of offering it, but how are they acquiring it? How are they at the middle school level? Because I believe we give them a choice to opt into Spanish or Mandarin. What's the continue on in the Mandarin? And then at the high school, what is the uptake, from those that have come from Bessie Rhodes at a higher rate? So I think that data would be a little helpful for us to assess as to, there was a comment in here, potentially maintaining Mandarin in the middle school, or around community engagement. That seems very, that seems like a reasonable thing to me. I'd also want to talk about what are the mitigating factors of switching it now. So what are the, advantages and disadvantages of making that switch, and hearing those concerns. I think that's really all the questions I have. I will leave my opinions till later because we're still ruminating on this. But I wanted to finally, again, thank you, Stacy. I will thank John Price too, because he's not here, but he started this process. Suni and I have been here since 2013. We've known that the decision, we need to make a growth decision on TWE. We had to postpone it because we had so much other uncertainty in the state of our district. And I hear the comments around, timing and feeling a sense this is too urgent and too fast. I totally hear that. I also believe that while it would be nice to make all decisions at one time, we can't. This is a decision that we need to make a decision because we have put it off too long, and we're jeopardizing the fidelity of the program, and we have been, and that's been hard to sit with for the last several years. So I know we have to make forward, and I appreciate all the work that you all have done to help make that as best a decision as it can be when it's always difficult to create disruption anywhere in our system, and do that for all of our children, and especially our English language learners. So thank you, Stacy. Thank you to all of you. So.
And thank you. I appreciate all the feedback, and we'll definitely take that and consider how to respond to those questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on, Anya.
So, thank you. Also, I've appreciated the arc of our conversation, and I appreciate the responsiveness. I feel like a lot of the questions, concerns, and suggestions that we've been discussing since we started at least the discussion back in June have been incorporated. And so I really appreciate that. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I think that we've already discussed, but I think also is important to reiterate, but also it's important for our community to hear it, as opposed to all of our conversations happening in over email or in meetings, which is appropriate, but I also want to share them with the public. So I think that it's really important, and I feel like it's been acknowledged in the memo. My computer is acting funny, so I can't pull out specific points at this point. However, I think it's important for us all to acknowledge that this conversation it triggers a lot of excitement and joy, rightfully so, and it also triggers pain and concern and worry, rightfully so. And I think for a lot of different reasons, some of which I understand and probably can empathize with more, and others which I appreciate hearing from our community about as well, to kind of broaden my my perspectives. So I also, we talked about this, but have the question of what can be done, what are the choices and the decisions that are being made in terms of maintaining Mandarin or not. I think we have a lot of students who have a second language. And for some of those students, their Asian heritage is not something that's elevated. And I think that I've heard from a few different people that they feel like their status as students with a second language, but a second language that is not as prominent as Spanish, leaves them feeling a little bit displaced and marginalized. And so I imagine, and I think we heard tonight, that there are some people that look to Bessie Rhodes as this opportunity to have a global perspective and also have Mandarin as a language. So I'm just wondering what's the, if we could have continued or more data about what's the decision point, and is it fiscal, is it culture and climate, is it all of those things, but just so that we can make a more informed decision about whether or not Mandarin is something that can be maintained or phased out more slowly, as opposed to. Can I interject for a quick second? Yeah.
So we certainly are hearing that concern, and we will consider that concern and bring back kind of thought points. But what I do want to, and I want to speak a bit to the thinking behind the recommendation to move to Spanish. The thinking and the goal around moving to Spanish is to tighten a school-wide community. If we have students entering and are learning Spanish in our kindergarten classrooms, giving the opportunity as we grow out for the other students that are not part of the two-way immersion program to be learning Spanish in an environment where we're changing signage and looking to move more to a wall-to-wall program, creates a connection across the school. And one of the things that is foremost in our thinking here is we want to build on the strength of Bessie Rhodes and have Bessie Rhodes continue to be strong and get stronger with the arrival of the two-way immersion program. And in that, we've also heard conversations about how do we keep these two communities connected, the students that are in the two-way immersion program and the students that are not. And language is one way. And that is some of the thinking behind that recommendation. We are hearing from the families to really kind of, we're hearing their perspective as well, and we'll definitely consider that as we think about how to move forward. But that is a bit of the, I wanted to just kind of share the thinking, and you mentioned, it's anchored in school culture, as well as that opportunity for even the students who are not in the two-way immersion program to learn Spanish in an environment that is valuing Spanish and will be heard in the hallways, is a way of bringing the community together and accelerating their language acquisition.
And so I think the other question I have then also that came to me tonight was, are there other opportunities to use whatever expertise we've established around Mandarin in other school environments, so that it's not just a loss area of expertise in our district. In terms of so I'm going to go back and forth. So in terms of points of joy, I think that we shouldn't underestimate the fact that we have a marginalized population that is not getting right now the optimal services that they need in their TWE program. And that we would be remiss as an institution if we continue to know that and not consider how to address it. And change is difficult, but I think it's really important if we have the opportunity to engage in change together, right, and hear from one another together, that we can listen to each other empathetically and also celebrate what is difficult, but also celebrate what's exciting. And I think that there's I'm glad that we have time for this discussion, because I don't want those opportunities to be lost, to hear from folks for whom have been waiting for this opportunity and who have felt marginalized or set to the side, and maybe don't always have a platform for having their voices heard, but also hearing about what is difficult and what we may be missing and how we can do that well. I know that we are discussing this 2 more times as a board, but am I also correct that there's other events and opportunities to engage with the community. Can we say those dates again and talk more about what those opportunities are?
We have a meeting at Bessie Rhodes November 15th at 6:30. We are also meeting, we'll also be at the November 30th PTA meeting at Bessie Rhodes. And so those are two school-based engagements that we do have on the calendar, and we've already shared with the Bessie Rhodes community.
And then another point of, I think, of pain is just the awareness that ACC has been severely under-supported and neglected, that our community did vote down a fifth ward school, and that though Bessie Rhodes will maintain a global studies focus and the TWE immersion is going to elevate that, or the two-way immersion is going to elevate that global studies focus, I think that as an institution we just can't ignore those two facts and how that impacts the engagement and the trust of the Black community in engaging in this opportunity. And so we've spoken about this as a board, we've spoken about this in meetings, that I think it's really important that Black students are not in the program as a demographic guest. Like, hey, we need to really increase these numbers for the sake of increasing these numbers. I think it's really important, and it's actually completely relevant to the curriculum to invite Black and brown students and all the students in our district to benefit from a culturally relevant curriculum that elevates a truly global perspective. Spanish language is spoken by so many different people of different racial backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, and this is the opportunity to elevate that and to do it thoughtfully. And so I think that's something that's really important to me to hear elevated more. And I just think outreach to the Black community is great, but it's not going to be effective unless we're also having an honest conversation about the trepidations, which is that thus far, as a district, it has been a marginalized perspective. And while I don't think that inserting ACC in a way that's disingenuous into this conversation is necessary, acknowledging the fact that we have a great deal of work to do, and that this is something that should be celebrated and learned from. Like, we have a staffing model that has supported the capacity to make this recommendation, that has supported the capacity for our district to have a program that is research-based, that is culturally relevant, that has room to grow in terms of hearing from educators and being more culturally relevant, but is significantly more supported than ACC or any targeted curriculum for building access for Black families. And so I don't want to lose sight of that. And you spoke to that in the memo, but I think it's also something that needs to be elevated in our subsequent discussions.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I did not elevate that in tonight's conversation, and we see the opportunity to do two-way immersion program at Bessie Rhodes as an opportunity to really broaden the scope of some of the learning. We intersect that with a social studies curriculum review. We've got some money allocated for curriculum review and development annually at Bessie Rhodes as part of the Grow Out, and the goal is to really have that reflect a greater diversity of the global experience. So we appreciate that and really focusing in on Black contributions in the Latino context. And so there's value there, and we want to make sure that it is not just a demographic, that it's a meaningful place where we really are accelerating students' achievement in the program, and specifically Black students' achievement.
I heard you mention also that just now that it's inserting the Black experience in the Latino context. I would also argue that not being specifically in the Latino context, but also just in the context of all learners having access to appreciation for different heritage is important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's all.
I'd quickly like to acknowledge daylight savings time and its havoc that it's wreaking with my brain, so I apologize if this is not coming out as eloquently as it should. But the one point that I wanted to add on that I think hasn't been brought up yet by my colleagues is just the massive undertaking that this is going to be. You've done a very good job of, putting together a presentation that I think really highlights the positives and the reasoning and the rationale. So thank you for that. But this is a massive undertaking that's going to have to happen in short order. So I'd really like to be able, in future conversations to really truly understand as detailed as possible the implications for the current Bessie Rhodes community and how to truly make the transition be as seamless as possible, to make sure that we're really thinking ahead as much as we can around every corner that we possibly can. One example I think that was brought up today, and I think was, there seems to be a bit of a push and pull on this as far as, what's really wanted by the community at Bessie Rhodes. For instance, if you have one student or one child who's in second grade at Bessie Rhodes right now and you have a 4-year-old, it seems like the choice is much more likely to be that the parent pulls both children from Bessie Rhodes and sends them to the neighborhood school, versus having one child with a monolingual experience and having another child with a two-way immersion experience. So I just want to make sure that we're really fully cognizant of exactly what really is going to happen with the community, a change that we wouldn't have had to consider if this were a neighborhood school where there'd be less choice amongst the parents at the school.
So I think we have had conversations that reflect, have parents in a number of different places. We have parents that are excited about the opportunity. We have had that question about educational continuity, and that if I already have a student in Bessie Rhodes, what will it feel like to have a student in a two-way immersion program within Bessie Rhodes in addition to a student that is not in a two-way immersion program? A couple of things we did highlight for the families and in that parent conversation is that two-way immersion teachers do generally, they send homework home in English and Spanish, so the parent has that opportunity to access an English version of that homework to support their student. And then the two-way immersion classrooms operate on a very similar curriculum, so the learning outcomes and experiences are similar. They're not identical, but they're similar. And so the experience of what a student has learned in kindergarten, first grade, second grade is going to feel very similar. And so they will be able to connect in the continuity of that experience. It's still everyday math curriculum. It comes home in Spanish with an English version to support the parent in that support. So there are very significant similarities that parents will be able to tap into in regards to continuity of that student's experience. And we can continue to think about ways to strengthen that continuity for those families.
Right. So I think my point is really not necessarily that I need to be sold on whether or not parents are going to have their children have the two different mildly different experiences, but really that we understand with the finite existing Bessie Rhodes community what will likely happen. I think we really want to avoid situations where, grades 3 through 5, we see a 40% switch in school in 1 year. That would be an issue for us to deal with. And that's, I think, information that we're able to gather because, again, it is a finite community. And I think the other issue then is with the teaching staff, how do we mitigate issues in the transition there as well, in a very finite manner. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Stacy, for all your work on this. I know that it's, and your whole team. And thank you to the community members that came out tonight, especially because most of us aren't very familiar with your community. And so we recognize that this decision is going to impact specifically the people who came up and commented, but most importantly, all of our kids. And I think from what I've heard tonight, what's most important to me is to ensure that wherever we place these new strands, is that those children are going to feel welcome, and that the children that are already at those schools are going to be as minimally disrupted as possible. So this is a community effort, and this is, we've been talking about this for years, and it's been so painful that I guess the district has been putting it off, long enough, but we're at a point where we need to make a decision. And we do need community members to be on board with it. So I do appreciate the Bessie Rhodes parents who came and shared with us their viewpoints. But I just want to emphasize that these conversations that we have as adults, they're impacting our kids. So just as a reminder to everybody, is we're having these conversations out in the community, that we remember the kids who are listening to the conversations, and that we keep it constructive, and that we choose our language carefully. So again, being that it's not easy, I think that some of the questions that I have and concerns is just in regards to the community being heard and the process by which this recommendation came about. And also, we have very informed and attentive parents, and I think that as a parent, I would want to know what other considerations and what weighed heavier on this selection than, let's say, any other second or third school. And, I think informing the community of that would be helpful. As a community, we're going to be dealt with this decision, and I think that thinking back to the possible existence of a fifth ward school and how this would have fit perfectly in there, and also thinking about there was a comment about boundary changes and how that might impact it, and I think that it would be helpful to have some information with regards to that as well. But again, I think most importantly, the community wants to feel that they're being heard, and this is both through educators who might have been able to provide a better insight. And that was part of the conversation, I think, 2 board meetings ago, and just us wanting to hear from you how the teaching community was involved and how the school community was involved in making this decision. And I think it would be helpful for all of us to know how they were involved. And I think there's also just some concerns about the parents that were surveyed and really what that's going to look like. To echo, the comment that was made regarding what the pushback is going to be from parents. I think I want to know if how many families would decide to pull out their students in the coming school year, and how that's going to affect enrollment. That's something that. That's not going to only impact the coming classes, but also registration from Lincoln and Walker, and that has already been addressed. I do want to just put this out there that this is an incredible opportunity for our community should we decide to move forward with a dual language school. I know that it would cause significant disruptions, but at the same time, it would really position Evanston as a school that people would want to come to participate in a dual language school. It would increase efficacy of the program in allowing us to teach kindergarten through 8th grade. And it would also encourage global citizenship. I think a lot of people minimize the importance of the Spanish language. It is the second language spoken in the world, and in every country that I've been to, Spanish is spoken there. And so I just, I want to emphasize that the dual language opportunity that we have here, it is a global experience, and it's an experience that I hope will also incorporate the African experience, because it's hard to separate Latin American culture without pointing out the African experience in our culture. So that's one of the things in your recommendations in how you're gonna increase the Black student participation. I think that you're going to increase that by having them see themselves in that program, and their history is embedded in our history. And so it's unfortunate that what's being taught in ACC is not being taught throughout the district, because I think that there's incredible value and richness in the curriculum. My daughter was in ACC for kindergarten, and I remember just time and time again wishing that it was something that was offered to all of our kids. And finally, the issue of just normalcy and keeping everything as normal as possible and not taking away things that families value in their community. I think that it's important, and it's already been brought up already, but the issue with the language in Chinese being offered at Bessie Rhodes and what would happen to that, and hopefully that wouldn't go anywhere, because I think it would only increase the value of the global experience that that school could offer.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Both of us do.
I think most board members have already stated the things that I was going to say, but I do want to again highlight, in the equity report that we are going to be talking about in our next discussion item, one of the recommendations that we were given was about reducing the racial disparity in busing. And that's something obviously that for years and years has been an issue, and not having a neighborhood school in the Fifth Ward. It looks to me like, and I understand the busing costs aren't going to increase, but I think we'll still be busing. We're not going to be, this proposal doesn't do anything to reduce the racial disproportionality of busing in our district. I don't know if it will increase it. Even if we don't have to increase busing costs, I don't know if actual number of students bused will be increased. Because I'm not entirely sure where we'll be pulling the students from. It looks from the chart that we have on page 27 of our packet, it looks like it might be Lincolnwood and Kingsley, and maybe some from Walker. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know, is that something that you could clarify what the anticipation Spanish-speaking population is?
Is 27 the map by ward? Is that the color-coded map?
Yeah, school attendance by block assigned to school.
Okay,
Hispanic
so
ELs.
that is Hispanic-speaking students that are not necessarily EL. So some of those, that's a ward map, I think. Are you looking at?
Well, this says Hispanic ELs in the 2016-17, so they're not necessarily all TWE students,
So I
but
think we need to, what we do see is that we have a rapidly growing population that is in that Lincolnwood feeder area. We know that we already bus a lot of students into the Willard zone, and we know that we're very much out of whack there. And so we do know that that there'll be a group of students that do come from that particular area that most likely will end up at Bessie Rhodes. I think we will need to see who the native Spanish-speaking students are that actually qualify for the program. The data would indicate that they will come from the west side of town and most likely the Fifth Ward and northern side. But again, it depends on who qualifies, who does not. Peter, can you speak to it in any more detail than that? No, I think it really is case by case, but we see a growing population in the Lincolnwood attendance zone, and we do know that the vast majority of our Hispanic speakers do live on the southwest and western side of Evanston.
Okay. And that, my other question based on this chart is we do have from Dawes a significant population of students. And again, I'm making an assumption here when I see that there are 21 students from Dawes who are at Washington, that those are TWE students. Because Washington doesn't have otherwise an ESL program, correct?
That is correct.
So, and then Oakton also has a relatively significant number of students who are going to Dawes, Dewey, and Washington, I would again assume for TWE services. So, again, when we talk about displacing students out of neighborhood schools, we're already doing that. We already know, we've known for years that we're doing that in a racially disproportionate way. And this doesn't really address that. So I just struggle with that. And I know that there is no perfect solution, and I know that we can't solve all of the problems at once. And I agree. I know we've been talking about expanding TWE for years now, and I do strongly believe we need to do this, and we need to do this for next year. But I do really just struggle with the fact that it feels a little bit like we're choosing one population over another. And I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what the answer to that. I don't know that there is a solution to that immediately. I do worry that as we do look at boundary lines, that we'll say, well, we already have a population of students that would otherwise be served by a neighborhood school already going to this magnet school, so we don't have to worry about that inequity anymore. I struggle with it. I feel like we're taking us in the wrong direction based on where the equity report says we need to be going. And again, I don't expect a response to that because I think that's just a reality we have to face. And I do, and just to kind of recap again some of the concerns that I think we heard from parents and from what we heard here, some of the high level themes is, we need more information on the whole, what we're hearing is concern about global studies, and that is, to the Bessie Rhodes community, that's an important part of the school community and school identity. So how is that currently supported? How will that continue to be supported with TWE as an addition to the global studies mandate? The concern about existing students and how we can preserve their experience as much as possible. And Mandarin seems to be the theme of an experience that people want to maintain for their current students who are there. But if there are any other experiences that people feel are important for their current students. And then the issue of teachers and working with our teachers union and making sure that teachers know that they are supported, however we can convince them to stay during the transition and making sure that they land appropriately afterwards. And then the additional concerns about Black student outreach being an important part of it, but not necessarily sufficient, that the program itself needs to be more welcoming of our Black students. And of course, continuing on with the other, I think what Joey highlighted at the beginning is that this is step one, but we still have other decisions we need to make because we still have single strands in other schools, which is not ideal. And we need to figure out where and how we're going to expand into the middle schools. So as much information as we can get on some more of those before the November 20th meeting. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of questions, but I think this is going to help us. It's going to help the community as we continue sorting this out through this process and making this decision. So I think I captured everything.
I had one more.
Oh.
Why don't you go ahead, Anya?
So one, I was just going to mention that I think a lot of those questions fall under what are the unintended consequences on the equity assessment tool. Right. So maybe just diving into that deeper, given the additional input that we've gotten, because it sounds like a lot of us have that across the board. I was curious also if we could just use this platform to elevate, if we have any dates or times or targeted ways that we're going to be specifically reaching out to Spanish-speaking families, and any targeted ways that we're going to specifically be reaching out to Black families, that we could use this platform to make that known so that folks know those opportunities are available.
So we're doing more phone outreach to Black and Spanish-speaking families that are currently in the TWE program, and that phone outreach is ongoing. And then I do not have dates yet for some of the Black family or Black community engagement. That's in process, but I can certainly have those dates available when we come back on the 20th.
And then Joey, you said you had one other thing.
So yeah, one last thought, and it's been said a couple of times. Mr. Burns mentioned it. I really want to know. I mean, I get this is the educator's recommendation for what's best given our current constraints, sites, everything. But I kind of want to know, pie in the sky, if we could do this anywhere without any concern for anything, dollar amount wise or where our buildings are. Would a Fifth Ward school be the recommendation? Given what we've heard in the equity report, given what we're about to jump into in the equity crosswalk. And I'm not asking that as a way to put people on the spot, because I think there's board members that have to have opinions on that too. But I think the biggest lure to get me to my kid's school is the fact that it's just a few blocks away. And I appreciate the dollar amount that goes into busing kids to community forums and engagement sessions, and as a Walker parent, I've seen that bus arrive at our sessions, and it's great that we can get all the families in the building, but you also can't hide the fact that they're Black and brown families that are getting off the bus, right? And I don't know if there's other ways to tether ourselves to engagement. and build community and kind of explore what that looks like. I think I've thrown this idea out to you. I know there's a building in the neighborhood where those kids come from that has an auditorium and a stage, and we could have done a performance right there in their backyard too. And I don't know what that looks like. And again, we're talking 10, 15-year ideas here. But I can't help but think that there's classrooms in our district where we're teaching kids a social studies curriculum that at some point touches on why we bus kids and how neighborhoods are formed. And are we waiting for the generation to grow up to make the change, or is that a conversation that we're old enough to have here? And again, not to be answered now, but I think it's a part of this conversation, just kind of knowing where everybody is. And if we think it's the right thing to do, but can't do it because of certain constraints, I think our community can also handle knowing that we want to do this, but we can't because of X. And I just think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. And I'm putting that out there, not knowing an awful lot about, obviously what that looks like in terms of research. And I know that you can't research that without taking other things off the plate, and I'm not suggesting that we reframe everything right now, but I'm reading this slide, I think it's slide 4. TWE frames bilingual education as enrichment rather than remediation and uses students' home languages as resources. And I'm wondering what it looks like if it's not TWE, but it's ACC frames, the African American experience and the Afro-centered curriculum as enrichment rather than remediation, uses students' colors, creeds, culture as a resource, right? When do we get to that part? And if a part of that and enacting that, because we keep having this conversation, is intertwining it with TWE, you can't look at the social studies curriculum and expanding TWE without at some point having that conversation. I know that's a much bigger rock than we have in the jar right now, but I'd like to see that on a discussion agenda at some point to bat around a little bit.
Thank you.
Can I just highlight one other thing? I just want to drive home again that cannot happen without the same staffing model that we have for TWE. And again, that's a larger issue that may not be contained, but I think that a lot of times institutions are opaque, right? And not by intention, but just by the work that we do. And so we can have vision, but we also need to explain the practicalities to our community. And so we have a drastic difference in terms of dedicated staff to folks who are thinking specifically about Black children and how learning happens for Black children in an institution that hasn't necessarily been set up to have full consideration for pedagogical needs. And that is the celebration of this opportunity, that we have an amazing staff team that has elevated our institution's understanding of biliteracy and culturally relevant education in a way that's an asset, not considered as a risk factor or deficit, but we still have yet to grow those opportunities for Black children and families in terms of how we staff that as an institution. And that's just a much larger long-term question, but we can't have one without the other, I think.
And one final question, which seems totally obsolete compared to the last two statements. Two-way immersion has a model with time allocations and all that built in. Do you know of any TWE programs that exist that also include a third language for exposure, similar to, we have a TWE program that's English-Spanish, but we're also offering all those students a Mandarin exposure experience as well?
I haven't really looked at that research in particular, but I will be willing to go and do that.
Just curious how that impacts the
model. I like just right off but it's just English and French. So it's really that third language. I'll be happy to look up some research.
Yeah, they're just probably not in this country. Right?
Yeah. Right. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I think we will have a lot to continue thinking about and digesting at our board meeting on November 20th, and certainly with the Bessie Rhodes community on November 15th.
And let me...
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey.
we clap, I want to salute Stacy and for her leadership on this and really being keenly focused not only on these issues, but other issues that relate to culturally relevant curricula. And those are pieces of the puzzle that we'll be working on as we go forward. And let me thank the board. These are excellent questions. There's a lot of them, and the clock is ticking between November 6th and November 20th, and we will do what we can do as best we can to address your questions and concerns. And if we can't address your concerns, we'll tell you that as well.
All right, thank you. Should we move on to the next one? Do we need to take a break? A couple of minutes, or can we go on to the? All right, let's keep going then. All right, our next discussion item is the strategic plan equity crosswalk.
Yeah, let me start that one too. So I'm going to kick this off very quickly, and given the hour, and find my notes. So let me provide context on this conversation as well, which is also includes a memo in the board book that we have shared with you. And again, the context goes back to last year when we accelerated our work across the district on a wide range of issues around equity and racial equity. We hired, contracted Corey Wallace, who's a well-known educator locally and nationally, who focused on multiple ways of looking at the district and really helping us to move forward in a swift fashion as we thought about our work on equity and how we can actually be even more proactive than we had been in the past. Corey helped to lead our first and initial foray into racial identity equity training, and we've accelerated that this year with numerous cohorts of colleagues who are working in Beyond Diversity and in SEED training. And this includes the board, it includes the senior team, it includes my training as well. Corey also conducted a comprehensive equity walk. She went to all 18 programs, buildings and programs, and met with our educators, met with families, observed in classrooms, had focus groups, and really harvested a lot of very important and candid voice. Corey also helped us in crafting an equity statement, a racial and educational equity statement, an equity policy. She helped us as we designed the district education, the district equity leadership team, and she helped as we did initial uses of an equity impact statement. So part of Corey's work was to gather this feedback, really unprecedented feedback, from community members and District 65 staff on issues and concerns related to equity through the equity walks. And she presented to the board last spring a report, and to the board and the administration that included ultimately 17 recommendations to address this school year. And indeed, as my colleagues will report as we move forward, we've incorporated 15 of the 17 recommendations into our current work plans as we speak. So what we're doing tonight is we're going to present the crosswalk that responds to the recommendations in the equity walk that Corey constructed, and how this work aligns with our strategic plans and our work plans. We believe, and we really strongly believe, that the work that this work really needs to be closely aligned, because all of our stakeholders need a single and clear vision of what our district priorities are. And we are committed, and I'm committed, to the equity work being the work, not a siloed set of work plans, but the work in the district. And this is an important step in that level of alignment that we've already done in embedding this in our work plans. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Maria and Peter and Ismalis to help us walk through what we've presented and then open up for conversation.
Okay, great. I will kick us off.
You got to get into the microphone.
I'm going to lean into the microphone to kick us off. And in the interest of time, I'll try to be quick-ish. So the document in tonight's packet was aimed at integrating the recommendations from Corey's Equity Walk report into our strategic plan work plans. We committed to developing and sharing a plan on that by October 31st, and wanted to present that as soon as possible. So in the document that you see, the big table, we've aligned the recommendations with the strategic plan buckets and specific strategies, and then included a description of our response to the recommendation in terms of the work that we have planned. So basically, as we approached this, we just felt it was really important to think of this work resulting from the equity report as part of the larger bodies of work as we align our strat plan and talk about the work before us, to just avoid having this dual sense of there's an equity agenda over here and there's a strat plan over here, and what are we prioritizing and treating something like an add-on or a checklist. We really are undertaking an effort to bring this together so that we have, as Paul said, a clear picture of our priorities and the work we're tackling.
So with that in mind, the report that Corey put together was a really important part of how we developed our work plans for this current school year. Paul mentioned earlier that Corey had a total of 17 discrete recommendations, and of those, there were only 3 that we really felt needed further exploration and evaluation before we could move forward. The other 14 were clear to us, and we felt like figuring out an implementation plan and moving forward was within our reach. So with that in mind, we're planning to move forward this year in the work plans that the board has already seen with either implementation or evaluation of 15 of the 17 recommendations, only leaving the parent-mentor program and, excuse me, the hour is late. Leaving only the parent-mentor program and one other recommendation, the 6 to 8 TWE for us to consider next year and in future years.
One additional thing to note is that we are further working to align our progress reporting and implementation monitoring of this. So we have in place in our district some good structures for monitoring progress on the strat plan and reporting out regularly. And again, we want to build on those and incorporate the equity work into that so that reporting on the equity work isn't, oh, what did we promise in that other list? Let's go figure out when to report on that when asked. So what you may have seen or may have noticed in the big board calendar document is that, is it that one, Candace? Yes, that Candace carries with her everywhere she goes apparently, is the quarterly strat plan progress report updates say Q1 strategy and equity update, Q2 strategy. So the goal is that these things are getting reported on as part of our regular cadence of updating our implementation reporting. So that's happening on a regular basis.
The other piece that we covered in the memo to make you aware of is that we also plan to revisit some of the way that we report out on our strategy indicators, those indicators that let us know how well we are doing with implementation. So we'll stick with the same outcome measures that we're trying to move, but we really feel like now about halfway through the strategic plan with this revitalization and alignment between our equity work and the strategic plan would be a good time for us to identify whether the strategy measures that are part of the January scorecard that we'll publish again this year as we have in the past years need to be revisited. And so our plan is again in January, as we have in the past, to report out a series of progress indicators and also to identify whether there are any new indicators that we want to report on. So just as an example to make that concrete, within the area of family and community engagement, we have a number of indicators there that are really about quality of partnerships, which was one of our key strategies when we adopted the plan. We have done a lot of work in that area of partnership, but clearly the work that's happening for equity training across the district for our staff is a more important focus for us at this point. And so we might want to incorporate indicators about the reach of our training, how many of the staff have been through the experiences, as well as perhaps a quality measure about what people report about the experiences that they've had with that training. So just one example of what we might update as we bring that report to you for January consideration.
So that's just to give a sense of what the follow through on the plans that we outlined in the responses in the plan will look like. So they're not just going to sit on this piece of paper, that they will continue to get airtime and follow through in a manner consistent with and joined to the way we've been doing it for the strat plan. So I'm going to stop there, and I know everyone's got the table, has looked at the table, so we just want to do any clarifying questions. Everyone is available to answer.
Joey, you want to start again?
I kind of want a column on the right that also has success criteria. So we got the response, like what's happening, what you're doing, and that's great. Love the narrative part. And I'm specifically curious to know what the success criteria or identifiers of success would look like in each of these areas as it relates to the extensive amount of time and money that's being invested in staff training. So what's the byproduct of all that training? Because at some point, when we say that by the end of next year and 2 years, everybody's been trained, we would expect some kind of cultural systemic change to the institution. And I'm looking at things like 1C. So to address disproportionality in special education, we plan to study the issue with diversity of staff involved in the IEP process so we can identify root causes in our policies and practices that lead to overrepresentation of students of color in special ed. So if we're training teachers to look at our students differently and understand our students differently, we would expect less overrepresentation of students of color in our special ed programming, right? Like I'm wondering if that's something that could be done, because that, in one of the future monthly report outs, that would be interesting to see not just what's happening, but what do we think is going to be happening down the line.
And I think that that's a good example of possibly the type of metrics that, when we talked about incorporating new metrics into the January scorecard, that's our kind of progress monitoring tool, that's the exact opportunity that we want to make sure that those reflect this work.
Great, awesome.
I think specifically to your question about the investment of training, I'm not sure if that was an example or a specific question, but I think that's one area because it represents a significant new expenditure that we have given quite a great deal of consideration to. So we've really been thinking about that in terms of reach, sort of effectiveness or quality of the training, and then application. And our way of measuring reach, obviously, is how many people have been trained out of the total number of people who have been targeted for training. And so we've been monitoring that, and Beatrice has created an opportunity for us to track that in our employee system so we could look at any given time and see which of our employees have had Beyond Diversity training and which ones have not. We also keep track of who's been going through our seed cohorts as well as who's participated in other equity learning opportunities.
Do you have a way to track, sorry to interrupt, only because I think it's really important across lots of these indicators regarding training, who's gone to the training because they volunteered versus who's gone to the training because it's now their turn?
Yeah. Well, so far, no, because everybody who has participated has been volunteer.
But at some point, you're going to be training people who maybe didn't want to do it on their own, and I think that's a different part of the heavy lift.
Right. So yes, I think that is also an important thing for us to track. In terms of the quality, what we have done is to do a combination of sort of self-assessment, some video recording, qualitative sort of recording of participants' experiences. We use that as a technique in SEED, for example, as well as some basic surveys like, did you find this training effective? Was the facilitator a good facilitator, and that type of thing. So we have kind of a mixed method way of gathering feedback. We offered back to school PD this year, and we got an exit slip from everybody who participated. So we're trying to assess the quality of the experience from the point of view of the participants, and using My Learning Plan as well as a way of gathering that from all teachers who participate.
And your point, we trained all the new teachers who came in this year in Beyond Diversity. It will be interesting over time to survey them or whatever to see how much that training penetrated their practices 2, 3, 4 years in.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So to Paul's point, the third thing that we're measuring is reach, application. And so the way that we did that last year was through our annual employee survey. So in addition to asking a series of questions that the board's familiar with from what we put into the packet last spring, we also asked some questions about what equity learning opportunities did you experience this year, And then how frequently are you applying what you have learned in the context of your classroom? And so use that data as an initial way of looking at application. I think as we go forward, we can look at other possibilities. I think my desire to measure probably exceeds my ability to measure. And so we've talked also through our NERA partnership that you heard about last month with some different faculty who could potentially also assist us in looking at this in different ways, both through our NERA partnership and through other venues. And so it takes a little while to go from idea phase to having a funded study, but it's certainly something that we're looking to pursue if there are faculty who could potentially help us look at this in a more robust way than we can with our internal resources.
Great, thank you.
Can my comments are kind of related to that, Joey. So, from my perspective, when we think of application, and because I've asked the question of outcomes before, and it's not necessarily the lagging outcomes of achievement. That's what we ultimately want to get to, but we know that there's a more robust picture here. And so how can we look over time at the impact on students and their sense of identity, value, belonging, which I think that, that's the theory of change here, right? We need to make sure that every student feels reflected, valued, identified, related to having strong relationships in their classroom, and that they are, those are celebrated, and then that also then leads them to have more self-efficacy, and then obviously knowing that they have potential and achieving that potential, and as well as the instruction applies to them. So while I think it's important to ask teachers, I ultimately think we need to get to, and I know this is a challenge, especially in the younger grades, but we need to get to understanding over time how this affects differences in the way children are viewing themselves, and even families potentially are viewing themselves, with respect to the institution that we're trying to shift. And that for me is the most amorphous piece of this, and what I have not frankly seen being measured or attempted to be measured, at least in what I've been able to garner in other organizations and other school districts, and is that interim piece, because that's the lever, I feel like, and I might not be speaking to it directly in the right terms, but I feel like that's the lever that we're saying we need to then unleash the potential of a lot of our students. And so how can we measure that leverage point? And how can we stay true to that and see that we are affecting change in that area? Because otherwise, I think then it's a lot about, not that this isn't good work to be for adults, but it becomes about adults and not necessarily also about the effect on children. And so,
and you're right, there are challenges to measuring that, especially as the student population gets younger. We do have some data in our middle school students in terms of the 5 Essential survey that I think would be a place we could look for that. Also in terms of our parent survey, we wouldn't be measuring causation, right? We know that. We wouldn't be necessarily measuring the mediating impact of changes in teacher practice on those outcomes. If we were doing that, we'd be running a really robust research study that we don't have internal capacity to do, and hopefully could get partnership support to shed a bit of light on that. But I think in terms of, as you think about leading and lagging indicators, shifts in student perceptions of the learning environment among our students for whom we have validated tools for self-report in their age range would be something we could definitely look at.
and this doesn't mean that I don't think it's good to do, because it obviously, intuitively is good to do, but that we also need to go beyond that to make sure that we're shifting for our kids. So.
I think the other thing I would just highlight, this isn't necessarily to the measurement question, which I think is a good one, and it's related to feedback we've received from multiple board members and from multiple folks in the community about the need to measure other skills. And I think the skills you're pointing to are important skills, and they are ones that we want to move, and that we believe that in our equity work, that our equity work is not for a specific group of students only, and that in our equity work we develop skills in ourselves as educators across the board that allow students of all different identities to be able to grow in these skills because we create a more equitable learning environment, and that's good for everybody. But the other thing I would want to point out is when you read through this crosswalk, you'll see again and again that adult skill development is sort of a prerequisite to doing a lot of other things. This is very akin to the social emotional learning space, where if I as an adult have no experience of doing mindfulness practice, I'm not going to be able to teach a kid to engage in mindfulness practice in an effective way. Similarly, if I as an adult don't have an understanding of my own racial identity, it becomes very hard for me to help other people develop racial identity. And so you can see that that is sort of a key that unlocks many other things that we want to have happen in these other strategies. And so I think it's a both and, that by participating in many of these trainings, folks will develop skills that they could use in the classroom to potentially create more inclusive, welcoming, and equitable learning environments, but it also enables them to engage in learning about culturally relevant pedagogy in a deeper way. It enables them to work on student discipline in a deeper way. And so I think it goes both directly to students, and it also goes that as an adult with these new skills, I can also do other new things that'll benefit students in an indirect way.
And again, I mean, I think that's critical to our underlying theory of how this has worked. So I'm not diminishing that, the importance of that piece happening, just trying to think of, you know, ultimately how we get to the impact on kids.
So let's see. One, I think I just had a process comment, which is that I wonder if there are other opportunities to engage around this conversation before January as a board or as a community. Like, we have lots of community groups who I think could take a look at a draft or take a look at information and provide feedback, and us as a board too, before we have the expenditure of putting together a finalized copy and then of the crosswalk, and then as a board or as a community have an essential question or piece of information that would then alter something that is what was meant to be a relatively finalized draft. So is there an opportunity for that?
Yeah, so I think our thought was that we're bringing it forward in January as a discussion item for board discussion. And I know I talked about putting something together that's been formatted and translated just for making sure that the messaging is as clear and impactful as possible, but it definitely doesn't mean it's like on lockdown, and that as the board conversation unfolds in January that we can't make changes to it based on the direction of that conversation. So I think our plan was that, based on our timeline, was that that would be brought forward for board discussion in January, not as a totally locked down deal.
Okay, that makes sense. I would say also then perhaps planning in time or planning for time after we have that January discussion to engage with other stakeholder groups and give them the opportunity to more directly participate in that conversation, as opposed to just either commenting at the board level or sending emails, or but that they have an opportunity to actually sit with it, hear about it, and give some feedback, because there's so much valuable information and feedback in our community. And I guess my second question kind of lends itself to that, which is, I know this specific report was about the equity report recommendations and how what we're doing in terms of application of those. But for the crosswalk, are we looking broader than that, or are we just looking at incorporating the equity report recommendations into the strategic plan?
So for the work that we're bringing forward in January, it will have a broader lens than the starting point of the equity walk report recommendations, because we already had other work in progress that wasn't necessarily part of Corey's report, and we want to make sure that gets fully integrated as well. So the document tonight was grounded in that because that was what we had promised, that by October 31st we would have the response to those specific set of recommendations. So yeah, we'll be looking broader than that in January.
Okay, all right, great. So then just specifically a couple of things that came to mind immediately that I'll be curious about hearing more about or seeing in January are our early childhood programs and how those are aligned in order to address issues of equity, given how important we know early childhood is to access to educational equity, and that we do provide early childhood services as a district and have so many resources in our community to learn from and share with. And this issue of broadened assessment tools, which you brought up, Peter. I don't think I have any specific vision in mind in terms of how that's incorporated, but just the amount of time that we've spent talking about it feels like something that's important to include in the integration of equity in the strategic plan.
And if I may, indeed, those are two buckets of work that we're working on with the task force on early childhood and on the assessments. We'll be able to come forward with some early thinking about what our assessment system and where to go forward. I do want to, I want to clarify, though, that the strategic plan, which is 2015 through 2020, when we originally worked together as a community and engaged in this and had the more than 2,000 touches and the wide range of people who were involved in this, we created a plan that has many equity components embedded in it. And yet, with Corey's report, what this crosswalk does is it lifts those up. And I think partly what we'll see coming forward is the real focus within the plan, and then the real focus as Corey has pushed us to actually move forward on in more deep ways on equity. So I think, again, it's that earlier point that equity and the plan is the work. Equity is the work, and we're going to actually highlight that as we move forward.
I'm sorry.
I was a little bit confused with your comment when you're saying that the report, integrating the report with the strategic plan is important. Were you meaning narrowly integrating the report with the strategic plan?
No, I mean highlighting what is embedded in the strategic plan that really is focused on equity, and making sure that as we move forward on the work that we've doubled down on, that we actually highlight that as well.
I think it's, if I can just add, I think there are parts of the strategic plan that, to be totally candid, are light on the way they address equity, even though the sort of underscoring recommendation is a strategy that can be applied with a very specific racial equity intentionality. I think that when we talk about putting together our reflection for January, it really gives us a chance to give an update and a reflection from the point of view of 2.5 years in of implementation and a lot of thinking and learning about racial equity and how our framing and execution, there's a lot of different ways to execute a certain strategy. You can do it in a kind of across the board, not super focused way, or you can really say, I'm going to front load racial equity as the point of this strategy and do it with a higher degree of intentionality and elevate that aspect of it, and I think that's what we're looking to do. I don't know if that helps clarify, but is there anything else you want to?
Well, maybe we could use a specific example so that everybody kind of knows where we're trying to head. So I would refer maybe to one of the strategies in our family and community engagement area. And one of those is to develop staff capacity to better engage with families. And when we originally wrote the report, we had never had any Beyond Diversity training in the district. We had never had any SEED training in the district. And I think one of the initial milestones was that we were going to go out and find some families who would be willing to sit and talk with us and do some focus groups to begin to learn about this issue and say, as a district, what is it that we need to be doing differently? We're certainly in a very different place today as an organization than we were then in terms of what we know. As a person who typed a lot of the words into the strategic plan, I would use real different language today to explain what I was trying to say, but said in, quite frankly, using my white skin and lens and not having full perspective about how I would talk about that today. And so I think with that particular strategy, as we think about what our recommendation will be or how we would talk about how we do this going forward, I think we would talk about how Beyond Diversity, how seed training, how other learning opportunities that we would provide can build racial literacy in staff, and what the translation is from that to being able to engage with families, whether there may be some other things beyond that training that we need to provide or how that connects to other strategies in the plan. So with that as one area that's quite familiar to Ismailis and I, as an example, I think that's what we're looking to do in many different strategies across the plan.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had a hopefully quick question, especially given the hour. But I think it's similar to what Anya was asking about process, and understanding that the work that Corey Wallace did was tremendous, and brought up a number of issues to light that have been then crosswalked with the strategic plan. And then Maria understanding that what we see in January will be a broader scope of ideas and action items to take. I wanted to see what collaboration was being done with other school districts who've had some sort of success or have had spent more years than us working on this, and wondering if there's any sort of collaboration happening.
Not specifically on creating, to be honest, this document, because we have a work plan development process that happens every year where we will spec out sort of how we're approaching things. I think that there are other district models that inform the planning for those specific pieces of work. So, for example, we've got notes in there about the parent mentor program and where have we seen inspiration in a program like that to consider and do more research. That's in terms of fleshing out individual recommendations and our approach to them versus the macro level of how do we pull our recommendations, our thoughts together.
It just seems like, I guess, I'm concerned about there being a missed opportunity out there, that we are not a silo of Evanston, Illinois, in part of Skokie, Illinois, right? Like, I feel like there are a lot of other school districts that have similar challenges that we face here. And you guys are tremendous, but you're a lean team. And it would be really, I think, beneficial to our community and to like the country for us to be working in tandem with other similar districts that have similar challenges.
Lindsay, I want to thank you for that. I think that is important. I think we're learning a couple things from Logan Square, Niles, our colleagues at 202. I want to be careful as we embark on our own racial equity work here in District 65 that we don't get stuck doing technical change and we're staying with that adaptive change, because there's not one size fits all model for equity. So I think we need to figure out, and I think it was said at the last joint meeting, that we need to figure out what's going to work best here for our students.
Totally understood. Thank you.
But I would just add that there's districts that have been doing this work
Absolutely.
for far longer, and just I think having participated in the Courageous Conversation Summit, seeing what some districts similar to ours and also some districts very different to ours, the work that has been carried on, I think, yes, we want to find out our own solutions, but there's no need to recreate the wheel in certain cases.
So we have those specific things such as the parent mentoring model. We've collaborated a bit more. I literally had a conversation last week about our Black African Caribbean group. Many of our families intersect. So why are we and can we work together to create less is more? So I think there are definitely models out there that we can pull from that fit in with our larger vision.
So this, like you, Peter, you said the seed is very, very new, and I think that we're learning a lot through it, but I would see an opportunity for parent mentoring through participants that have taken seed, and for those that might want to take it in the future, maybe creating a connection through mentorship there. And also utilizing the individuals that are participating in seed for feedback as much as possible, and the teachers that have taken Beyond Diversity and have attended Courageous Conversations, to have them have a look at this. I think that there's a great deal of benefit in and having our colleagues that are already in the midst of the work and being able to provide some additional feedback, and also seeing the opportunities for the new initiatives that we have and how we could possibly connect that to something like parent mentorship.
I agree. Thank you.
I just had
go ahead.
I just wanted, in January, I'm very curious to hear more about the vision. I know that's still being worked out for the Welcoming Center, but that's something that I think is really exciting.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, the Welcoming Center.
Okay, thank you.
It's a really exciting opportunity, but I'd also be curious to hear more about like the vision for it.
And just in thinking of a parent welcoming center, I think this past year, there were some lessons learned on our family adult parent classes. There's some still barriers. We're not having the success, or, I don't want to measure our class success based on numbers. I think it's quality of the programming that our parents are receiving and then what they're gaining from that experience. So one of the things that we have noticed is that there are still barriers such as transportation, and we're kind of all over in the city right now at our different schools. And as our student population increases, we're kind of running out of room here for us to hold one space for our parents to come and feel welcome, that they could have access to programs and services that are provided here at the district, where they have a space that's confidential to work with our staff, where we could hold some of those classes. So that's what I would like to see for that space. And also, how do we invite our partners in, possibly from the city of Evanston, to come and get services and access to those resources that are out there as well.
I'd like to add that, that we consider not only just having a parent center, but also going to the parents and where they're at. So again, utilizing, we have several family engagement and family liaisons, again, that are embedded in our early childhood programs and the bilingual programs. So kind of trying to be strategic in regards to how we utilize current staff, right? That is charged with engaging families. So just to kind of be mindful of that, and again, it's a both and, right? Both and. So one of the obstacles, if it's transportation, then what do we do at the local school, right? And I think I'm reminded of the time when you guys, when the district presented some information around Latino student achievement, right, over at the St. Nick's Church last spring. And how a lot of the innovations that were presented were grown in the individual schools, right? So going to that piece, like you talk about, Ismael, is that where again schools have the talent and capacity within themselves, right, with the teachers and staff and students to create some solutions that again didn't emanate from us, but were kind of grassroots and homegrown within those schools, right? So elevating, a lot of the best practices, like, one of the ones that we adopted at Dawes was what we heard at Dewey, was where they had the embajadores de lectura, the reading ambassadors. It was great. It was a way to interact, to have, the native English speakers, native Spanish speaking families interact in somebody's home. And just incredible. Or the partnership with Northwestern over to Washington, where they brought in, Spanish-speaking, science professors, right, who did a science. I mean, it was again innovative stuff that came out of those parent groups, out of those specific, schools, which is very grassroots. So again, really trying to look, again. These are wonderful recommendations, but also let's continue elevating, what our schools come up with at the grassroots level, at school-centered level. I mean, because again, there's some incredible and powerful work, and some powerful parent groups that have emerged, right, through the support of the district, right, and the leadership at individual schools. So just my comment.
I'll just add to that the home visit program here on site is also another. I know that folks are provided transportation and education and dinner, et cetera, for those kind of events. And so, where are we elevating what we're already doing well, and also filling in gaps in areas that we need to. So it's great.
And I just would like to offer just a point of clarification that the January document is not the 2018-19 work plan, right? So the good news is that it's hopefully meant to set that conversation up actually much earlier than we usually do. So usually the beginning of the work plan conversation happens in June when everyone's kind of sputtered out at the end of the year, and then, we have that meeting where there's a big brain dump of what should we think about for next year. And it's all very time crunched then on building the work plan over the summer, which comes back in August. So our hope is that the January document stimulates this exact kind of conversation where we have a touch point earlier in the cycle to say, given our reflections on where the work has come and the purpose of the work and where it could go going forward, let's get the ball rolling earlier to have this exact kind of input and discussion. So I hope that helps.
And it will tie to our budgeting process as we go forward. So we'll be
the budgeting process.
So we can actually be strategic. We can practice strategic budgeting as we move forward, and we can really define what we really can do and what we should put into a back burner so we can really focus on what we really need to focus
on. I think to kind of piggyback a little bit on both what Anya and Sergio said, looking to stakeholders, I think an important stakeholder group that we need to make sure is involved in this process are teachers. As several of us who came from went to the TURN conference last week, the Teachers Union Reform Network, understanding how that collaboration with the teachers who are working with the students at the site level, understanding how, especially with teachers, like Rebecca said, who have gone through the training and are maybe starting to incorporate some practices in their classroom, how we can create structures for hearing that kind of feedback that we can then broaden out more globally to the district, I think is an important part of the puzzle. And so we need to make sure that we're engaging our teacher leaders in this work as well. And then a couple of just specific things to address in 1B, identify means for incorporating racial literacy into the curriculum, and the K-12 anti-bias framework, which I think that is important. I also want to make sure, and maybe this was in here and I didn't see it, but that we're really talking not just about culturally relevant pedagogy, but culturally accurate in terms of increasing, looking at our curriculum and seeing where we can, identify, for example, in math, highlighting the Black mathematicians or Black scientists, things like that into the curriculum where maybe the textbooks don't already include that. So I think having some sort of way to capture that, I think, in addition to racial literacy is important. And also, again, touching on the number 7, institutionalizing the commitment to equity through dedicated staffing. And I know we've talked a lot about what staffing models we currently have to address equity and Black student achievement. I would encourage to echo what Joey kind of said before, encourage big thinking on this one. If money were no object, what would that staffing look like? What would we, would it be a Black student achievement coordinator? Would it be, I think we talked about at Summit hearing about schools, districts that had equity coaches that would work in schools and support the work of teachers who had done the training and were trying to institute classroom practices but could help support that. What that kind of a staffing would look like. I think it's important to just hear that, and then as we go through budgeting and resource allocation, we can make some of those.
As we've already been starting to consider this, we've been asking ourselves, what will facilitate and accelerate the achievement of our Black students and our Latinx students, et cetera. But if we ask that question, then we have to then come back with what different models we might have to be able to respond to that. And then if resource were no problem, then we'd have to think about that, but resource always is constrained. So within resources, let's start with the primary visionary question of an actual question of how do we really facilitate and accelerate, and then how do we facilitate a change process that goes on in classrooms, in schools, with our leaders in buildings, because that's where the action happens, and so that's the contemplation that we're going through right now.
I'd say, just to add to that, I think this is a place, to Rebecca and Lindsay's comments earlier, that it would be great to see other models of what other districts have done and are doing to accelerate that impact and change from an organizational standpoint. Obviously, we will chart our own path, but, you know, what else is out there and what are some of the options? I would like to see that, you know, as we go forward and make those kind of decisions.
And I would argue that we do have a model in our district of how we have supported two-way immersion in terms of staffing support and what we can learn from how that program has accelerated culturally relevant learning opportunities while still having opportunities to grow, but that we do have a model within our district as well that we can do some learning from in addition to looking externally.
So I think, you know, kind of recapping this discussion, like having, when we come back in January or before, whenever we have the next chance to discuss this, looking at more specifics around implementation and what does success look like, how are we going to measure that, the, you know, additional process of how we're going to engage other stakeholders in developing this work, and then additionally beyond the equity report, what we're going to be looking at, how early childhood fits in, how broadening assessment tools fits in, and some of these other things that we've been talking about. So I think that captures that discussion. If it doesn't, I apologize, it's late. But on that note, if no one has anything else to talk about, and given that it is quite late in the hour, I think, thank you very much for all the work. I know it is late, and I appreciate everyone who has stayed engaged in this, but these were definitely two very important discussion items, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to discuss them as we did. And that being said, I adjourn this meeting at 11:05.